The Rise of America 1620. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 51: Discussion about Lao Hei. Should we go buy some black people from the whites? Wang Shan's suggestion tempted Zhao Hongyu, as he was currently short on manpower. Wang Shan nodded and said, "Yes, Chief. With a shortage of genetically modified individuals, buying some old black slaves would be a very good idea. Those old blacks are strong and hardy. Even if they can't farm, we can use them as lumberjacks." Zhao Hongyu's eyes lit up. That's right, those old blacks are strong and sturdy, making them perfect for manual labor. However, Zhao Hongyu's brows then furrowed as he thought of something more troubling. Those old blacks were strong, but they were also difficult to manage. In the history textbooks Zhao Hongyu was familiar with, there were many instances of black people rebelling against white people. Many white people had died in the process, and Zhao Hongyu didn't want to face the same fate himself. After all, he was already short on manpower. If he bought some blacks, he would definitely have to assign someone to watch over them. But if he did that, would he have the manpower to do anything else? It was precisely this thought that filled Zhao Hongyu with worry. Wang Shan noticed Zhao Hongyu's reaction, and he wondered why the once cheerful leader had suddenly become somber. "Chief, are you worried about anything?" Wang Shan couldn't help but ask. Zhao Hongyu replied, "If we actually buy those blacks back, and they're right if we're not on top of them, it would be very dangerous for us." At that moment, images of black riots in American blockbusters flashed through his mind. "You know, if I'm going to buy them, I'm definitely going to buy a lot. But with so many blacks at once, I'm worried I won't be able to control them." Zhao Hongyu didn't hide his concerns, sharing them with Wang Shan. Wang Shan smiled at Zhao Hongyu's story. "What's the matter? Am I wrong?" Zhao Hongyu asked curiously, noticing the smile on Wang Shan's face. "Chief, you're being overly concerned," Wang Shan said to Zhao Hongyu with a smile. "It's not that your concerns are unfounded, but we shouldn't underestimate ourselves. I know a bit about history. There were quite a few resistances from the old blacks in the early days. But under the bloody suppression of the old whites, didn't they become obedient?" Wang Shan began to speak. "Besides, we can hire Mohican warriors. With some rice and pickled mustard greens, I think they'd be happy to help us keep an eye on the old blacks. So, Chief, you don't have to worry too much." As Wang Shan spoke, Zhao Hongyu's frown gradually relaxed. Yes, it seemed he'd been overthinking it. The old blacks would resist, yes, but they weren't pushovers either. According to Wang Shan, whoever dared to resist would face annihilation. Furthermore, they could hire Mohicans to manage the old black slaves. Zhao Hongyu knew for sure that the Mohicans would be interested in such a job. Come to think of it, this job is pretty easy. All you have to do is watch the blacks work. If any blacks dare to make a move, the Mohicans will be responsible for killing them. It's much safer and easier than going out hunting. So, the Mohicans will definitely enjoy this job." Seeing Zhao Hongyu's frown soften, Wang Shan continued, "Chief, the question now is how many blacks we should buy back. Too many will be difficult to manage, but if we keep the number down, we can still manage. Also, Chief, do you want men or women? Do you want them to farm or do something else?" Wang Shan peppered the questions one after another. Zhao Hongyu pondered for a moment before saying, "Having the blacks farm is realistic. Even 100 of them wouldn't be able to reclaim much good farmland, so I'm thinking of having them cut down trees." Truth be told, Zhao Hongyu had long coveted the vast forest resources surrounding the area. Such resources were clearly before his eyes, yet he couldn't make a move. Let alone the frustration, it was excruciating. Zhao Hongyu also understood that relying solely on the sale of furs and gold wasn't sustainable. He had to plan ahead, not wait until the worst happened before making any plans. Take the fur trade, for example. If Zhao Hongyu assimilated the Mohicans and they accustomed themselves to their new lifestyle, they would no longer hunt, and would no longer be able to obtain furs. In that case, there would be no point in trading. Even if other Indian tribes came to trade, the animals on the American continent weren't inexhaustible, they would eventually run out. And what about gold? It might seem endless now, but in reality, it wasn't. The gold currently being mined is only exposed, while the majority is beneath the surface. Zhao Hongyu, on the other hand, didn't have the ability or technology to dig deeper. Once the gold above the surface was mined, Zhao Hongyu's income would surely plummet. Therefore, Zhao Hongyu had to consider this issue and develop more avenues of income to avoid such a situation. If such a situation did arise, Zhao Hongyu wouldn't panic. Start a timber trade, Wang Shan thought for a moment, then said, the surrounding forest resources are quite good. If we can start trading, we'll have another revenue stream. However, we'll need to buy more blacks. Fewer won't be enough, Zhao Hongyu continued. I estimate we'll need around 300 men, and 500 to 600 women. If we hire the Mohicans as managers, we won't have to worry about those blacks doing anything rash. If they dare to make any moves, I wouldn't mind imitating the whites and giving them a taste of their power. His mind immediately flashed through the bloody scenes of American blockbusters, where whites inflicted on blacks. If whites can do it, why can't I? After all, in this era, there's no such thing as human rights. So, to protect my own interests, I had no choice but to sacrifice the blacks. Besides, even if he didn't do it, the old whites would have done it anyway. Rather than letting the old whites do it, it was better to do it himself. At the very least, he was better than the old whites. As long as the old blacks didn't resist, he would treat them well, and at least they would have enough to eat. You know, those old blacks who worked for the old whites in history didn't even have enough to eat. Thinking of this, Zhao Hongyu's guilt lessened considerably, and he felt that providing the old blacks with enough food was already a sign of great kindness. 500 or 600 women, Wang Shan's eyes widened, finding it somewhat incredulous. Chief, I understand your plan to buy 300 old black men. After all, mining timber requires strong men. But buying 500 or 600 women is a bit confusing. Wang Shan was completely confused. Why would the chief want so many women? Could it be that the chief had a strong taste and wanted to buy the women of the old blacks for sex? Wang Shan found the thought too shocking. After hearing Wang Shan's words and looking at his expression, Zhao Hongyu couldn't help but realize that Wang Shan had misjudged him. Looking at Wang Shan with a wry smile, Zhao Hongyu said, am I that bad? Stop imagining things. The main reason I bought 500 or 600 old black women is to reclaim our Manhattan Island. Wang Shan raised his hand and scratched the back of his head awkwardly, feeling deeply sorry for his misjudgment. Don't you think about it? Leaving such fertile land as the Manhattan Plain unused is a waste. So we have to use it, don't we? Wang Shan nodded as he listened. Yes, the Manhattan Plain is fertile, and if reclaimed, it would definitely be excellent farmland. And 500 or 600 old black women could reclaim at least 10,000 acres of land, right? If they found potato or corn seeds, just imagine how much food 10,000 acres of fertile land could produce. While it would take a long time to harvest, it would fetch a lot of money all at once. Even if they didn't sell it to the trader, they could keep it for themselves or trade it to the surrounding Mohicans. Plus, they could have 2 more dishes in their own diet. These days, Zhao Hongyu had been feasting on barbecue and pickled mustard greens every day. To the point of ecstasy. It hadn't been a big deal at first, but after a while, Zhao Hongyu couldn't stand it. Eating that kind of stuff every day would drive anyone crazy. Zhao Hongyu and Wang Shan chatted for a while longer before breakfast was ready. After breakfast, Zhao Hongyu let Wang Shan go and rest. He had been up all night, and he was terribly sleepy. When he woke up, the sun had just set. Zhao Hongyu found Wang Shan and talked with him in detail until midnight before they parted ways. Zhao Hongyu slept soundly, finally recovering. The next morning, he and Wang Shan paddled across the channel in a canoe and arrived at a Mohican camp to meet their leader, Samara. When the two of them just arrived in front of the yurt in Samara, Atito just happened to lift the door curtain and walked out with a pheasant in his hand. Hey Tong, good morning. Looking up, Atito saw Zhao Hongyu and Wang Shan. Good morning, Atito, is your father here? Chapter 52 The Origin of Happiness. Good morning, Hey Tong. How come you have time to come visit an old man like me today? Zhao Hongyu opened the door curtain and walked in. Samara greeted him with a smile upon seeing him enter. It's getting late, it's getting late. The sun is already so high up now, Zhao Hongyu smiled and waved his hand, then smiled at Samura's wife and Atito's sisters. "Please sit down." Samura raised his right hand and gestured. Zhao Hongyu walked over to his side and sat down. "The old chief is in good health now. He looks very strong." Zhao Hongyu sat down, looked him up and down, and said to Samura with a smile. Samura's smile widened upon hearing this. "No, he's old after all. No matter how good he is, he can't compare to the young ones. I know that very well, thanks to you. If you hadn't saved me, I would have gone to see the sun god a month ago." Samura mentioned the time Zhao Hongyu came to their tribe and saved him. "You're too kind, old chief. It's just a small favor," Zhao Hongyu replied with false modesty. After a brief chat, Zhao Hongyu got down to business. "Old chief, I've come to you primarily for this matter." Zhao Hongyu told Samura about his plan to form an alliance with a Mohawk tribe, using them as agents to trade with neighboring tribes. Samura listened quietly, smiling. Meanwhile, he was rapidly weighing the pros and cons. Zhao Hongyu's proposal was undoubtedly tempting, and Samura was well aware of the benefits. Samura was well aware of what Zhao Hongyu's products could bring to the Mohawk tribe. If handled well, the Mohawk tribe would reap enormous benefits, though there would also be some risks involved. However, compared to the benefits, those risks were manageable. "Old chief, I'll give you the goods. I'll set a price, and you can trade with the surrounding tribes. You can add a premium, and the extra profit will belong to the Mohawk tribe. Do you think this form of cooperation is feasible?" Zhao Hongyu spoke incessantly for a long time, then looked at Samura hopefully. Zhao Hongyu wasn't sure if Samura would agree. While this would greatly benefit the Mohawk tribe, there was also the possibility that Samura might see through some problems and ultimately refuse the offer. Once trade began, the Mohawks would rapidly change their current lifestyle, completely departing from their ancient ways. Who knows if any conservative elders within the tribe would object, derailing Zhao Hongyu's plan. The main reason Zhao Hongyu was so concerned about this issue was that it was the first step toward assimilating the Mohawk tribe. Once this first step was taken, the rest would be easy. Samura closed his eyes, considering it carefully. Zhao Hongyu saw Samura close his eyes, and he fell silent, waiting quietly. After a long moment, Samura finally opened her eyes and looked at Zhao Hongyu. "This won't harm us Mohicans. I have no reason to refuse. So, what price are you going to offer us?" Samura's words filled Zhao Hongyu with joy. He wasn't afraid of rejection. As long as he agreed, everything would be easy. "You can buy at the current price and sell it to other tribes. That's your business. We're just responsible for supplying the goods to the Mohicans. How much you earn depends on your own ability," Zhao Hongyu said. Samura thought for a moment and asked, "Is there any other way? We Mohicans don't trade, and I'm worried about problems." Samura's concerns were not unfounded. The Mohicans were indeed incapable of trade, having never experienced it before. In previous years, the Mohicans primarily bartered with neighboring tribes. This trading model was extremely primitive, often requiring only what they needed to exchange. Furthermore, they were not very good at bargaining, often suffering significant losses. It was precisely with this in mind that Samura asked this question. Zhao Hongyu thought for a moment and replied, "There's another model for cooperation. I'll provide the goods, and you, the Mohicans, will provide the labor. You'll also be responsible for ensuring our safety and the security of the goods, preventing them from being stolen. This way, after deducting the cost of the goods, we'll split the profits equally." Honestly, this approach would yield lower profits for both parties. However, it would strengthen the relationship between the two parties and bring them closer together. Furthermore, the Mohicans would avoid potential losses, and they had high hopes for Zhao Hongyu, a man of exceptional business acumen. Furthermore, the 50-50 profit split was even more favorable to Samura. "I like this second model of cooperation very much, but I need to discuss it with the tribal elders before I can give you a final decision." Although Samura was the tribal leader, he couldn't ignore the elders' opinions. Therefore, he couldn't give Zhao Hongyu a definitive answer yet, only stating that he was very interested in Zhao Hongyu's proposal. Zhao Hongyu wasn't surprised by this. "Then I look forward to hearing from you. Personally, I hope we can cooperate with the Moxigan tribe." Zhao Hongyu offered a few compliments and then left Samura's home. "Chief, do you think they'll agree?" Wang Shan asked after they left Samura's house. Zhao Hongyu shook his head and replied, "I can't control their thoughts, so how can I know whether they'll ultimately agree to our terms? But judging from Samuel's reaction, this old man is very interested in our proposal because he sees the benefits. Zhao Hongai recalled Samuel's reaction and said to Wang Shan thoughtfully, I hope they'll agree. Our trade volume has shrunk. If it weren't for the support of the gold mine, we'd be in trouble now. Wang Shan had also reviewed the financial statements Zhang Tai had sent, so he was very familiar with the current situation. Zhao Hongai nodded, a look of helplessness on his face. It can't be helped. The Mohican tribe only has so many people. Selling a few thousand iron pots is already a good deal, given the sheer number of families. And the purchasing power has been nearly exhausted. If we don't find them a way to make money, we won't be able to sell our products. Wang Shan and Zhao Hongai were discussing the current situation in the Mohican tribe. Over the past month or so, Zhao Hongai had plundered almost all of the Mohican for resources. Some Mohicans even traded furs for tents, leaving only a few wooden shelves in their homes. Zhao Hongai couldn't help but laugh at this shopping spree. Let's go find Black Bear and find out where the British camp is. We'd better leave right away and buy some Black Bear. Now that he had the opportunity to become a landlord, and even a slave owner, why wouldn't Zhao Hongai be anxious? He was a man with dreams. In the spring, with flowers blooming, facing the sea, basking in the sun every day. He'd had dreams of flirting with a maidservant in his spare time. There was a saying, one Zhao Hongai had always kept in mind and deeply believed, building one's own happiness on the suffering of others is the root of happiness. Author's note, this is a perverse theory. Readers, please don't believe it. The righteous path of life is full of vicissitudes, and we should still be upright people. Afterward, Zhao Hongai and Wang Shan left the Moxigan tribe and headed towards the gold mine deep in the forest. It was midday, and the morning mist still lingering in the forest. Combined with the temperature fluctuations, the air felt incredibly damp. A little squirrel crouched on a tree branch, gazing at the stranger entering the forest, its head tilted and its wide eyes adorably wide. Beneath the tree trunk, a plump groundhog half penetrated its head, observing for a long time. Only when it saw no danger did it emerge from its burrow. After a winter of hibernation, the emaciated and deformed brown bear stumbled about, needing to eat immediately to replenish its energy. Caribou leisurely searched for fresh spring moss, their favorite food. Large jackrabbits hopped and bounded through the forest, searching for fresh, tender mushrooms. Hedgehogs, foxes, coyotes, mountain lions, all kinds of animals, having endured the long winter, left their burrows and began to emerge. Woodpeckers darted from tree to tree, hammering their sharp, chiseled bills into the trunks, creating tiny holes and then snatching up the tender, white insects hiding behind them. Large parrots, with long tails and wisps of red feathers on their heads, sat on branches, their eyes fixed on the ground. Upon spotting prey, they launched a lightning-fast attack, then returned to their nests to pass the catch to their pups. Zhao Hongai journeyed, filled with wonder at the forest's bounty of resources. It's not just the wood, the fungi here are a treasure trove, Zhao Hongai said, making tisk, tisk, tisk sounds as he walked. Chief, these are green polluting fungi. In the 21st century, they'd be worth tens or even hundreds of yuan. If they were of higher quality, they might fetch over 1,000. Wang Shan's eyes flickered as he looked around. Last month, it was still winter, so the forest was empty. But now it's spring, a time of rebirth. It's also rained for the past few days, so some plants are growing rapidly, adding a vibrant, lush greenery to the otherwise drab forest. Chapter 53, Mohawk also has slaves. Do you want them? You want to go to the White Camp? When Zhao Hongai and Wang Shan found Black Bear and asked him their question, Black Bear hesitated. Yes, the White Camp has black slaves for sale, so we'd like to go and take a look and buy some. We also need manpower to develop Manhattan Island, and you know we're short on manpower. Zhao Hongai shrugged helplessly and said to Black Bear. The nearest White Camp is south of our Mohawk tribe, roughly within walking distance from sunrise to sunset. I'll send some warriors from our tribe to accompany you. Be very careful with those white people. Hearing that Zhao Hongai meant business, Black Bear had no reason to refuse. Thinking it over, Zhao Hongai was right. They were indeed short on manpower. Manhattan Island was so large, slaves were indeed indispensable if they wanted to develop. The Mohawks also had a considerable number of slaves, but they were all women, the product of wars with neighboring hostile tribes. He wondered if Zhao Hongai needed any. Thinking of this, Black Bear said, We have slaves in the Mohawk tribe, mostly women. I wonder if you need them. What? The Mohawks have slaves? Zhao Hongyu didn't know that. He'd assumed the Mohawks didn't need slaves. But Zhao Hongyu only knew a rough outline of history. He couldn't possibly know the true state of Indian life. Of course we do, you just don't know. Every year, for various reasons, we clash with neighboring tribes. We even wage wars, small or large. The men on the losing side are killed, and the women and children are taken as slaves. Black Bear blinked, looking at Zhao Hongyu in confusion. He found Zhao Hongyu's ignorance of this point odd. Could it be that this black-eyed tribe was different from the Mohawks in this respect? Women and children, Zhao Hongyu pondered. Logically, the more slaves, the better, but Indian women clearly lacked the physical strength and abilities of black. Chief, if the Mohawk slaves are willing to transfer, we're open to taking them. Don't worry about the women and children, they're also excellent laborers and good for farming. Wang Shan, seeing his chief remain silent and worried he might reject Black Bear's offer, quietly warned him. He spoke in Chinese, so there was no need to worry Black Bear would understand. Wang Shan's words instantly woke Zhao Hongyu up. It was true. It didn't matter if they weren't as strong as Black Bear, but these Indian women and children could be just as useful. They could cultivate the land and do what they could. Even if their abilities were limited, they were still more capable than women in the 21st century. And on their side, there was no need to worry about abuse. As long as they worked hard and had enough to eat, there would be no problem. And with enough food, these Indian slaves would surely do their job well. Of course, as long as they didn't resist, there would be no problem. But if anyone dared to resist, Zhao Hongyu would show no mercy. When it came to his own safety, Zhao Hongyu was no fool to play the good guy. He wouldn't compromise. Thinking of this, Zhao Hongyu looked up and said to Black Bear, "Well, if the slaves in the Mohawk tribe are willing to sell to me, I have no problem. I'll take as many as I can, all in exchange for rice. As for the price, you can figure it out. I won't bargain, after all, we're friends." Hearing Zhao Hongyu's answer, Black Bear grinned and laughed. As the losers of the Mohawk tribe's hostile tribes, the slaves within the Mohawk tribe were already of no use to the tribe. Keeping them was a waste of food, but killing them wasn't the custom for the Mohawk people. So, the women from the hostile tribes remained in the Mohawk tribe, living a half-dead life. For the Mohawk tribe, their presence had become a major problem, and the Mohawk people had long wanted to eliminate them. If Zhao Hongyu hadn't appeared and unexpectedly changed history, these Indian slaves would have been sold to the merchant baker. After being sold to baker, these Indian slaves would have entered a dark life. Near an English immigrant camp in Virginia, the British discovered a vast silver mine. The mining of the silver mine necessitated a vast number of slaves. Slaves' lives were not worth cherishing, but the British wouldn't work as miners. The conditions in the mines were so harsh that the British settlers themselves wouldn't take them. But the silver mine needed to be developed, so what was the solution? Slaves. Yes, slaves became the best option. Throughout history, this unknown silver mine had consumed countless innocent lives, those of Indians and black people. It could be said that the silver mine there was stained with blood and resentful souls. Of course, with the appearance of Zhao Hongyu, history has shifted. Zhao Hongyu, like a little butterfly, is constantly fluttering his wings, and the ultimate changes he will bring remain uncertain. Now, Zhao Hongyu, like a little butterfly, is fluttering his wings again. Slaves who were once the British's slaves, and who ultimately perished in a certain silver mine, may now become his slaves. Fate is about to be altered, and the threads of the three goddesses of fate are beginning to unravel. Zhao Hongyu and Black Bear chatted. They walked over to Black Bear's bearskin mat and sat down. Today I found the old chief, Samra, and discussed starting trade with the surrounding tribes. Zhao Hongyu told Black Bear everything he had discussed with Samra, hiding nothing. This is a good idea. I absolutely support it. Black Bear was no fool. Although he looked a kind of burly brute who relied solely on force to resolve everything, that was superficial and could be deceptive. Having known Black Bear for so long, Zhao Hongyu didn't think he was a reckless man. In fact, he thought his intelligence was even higher than Samura's. What Black Bear lacked compared to Samura was experience. After all, Black Bear was still too young. Samura was much older and had experienced far more. Even so, Black Bear could still see from Zhao Hongyu's plan that the Mohawks might be changing. Have you thought about this, Black Bear? Zhao Hongyu lay down, his thick bearskin mat warming him completely. Even in early spring, if this plan goes off the ground, the Moxigan tribe won't have to worry about food anymore. You won't have to risk your lives battling wild beasts, nor will you have to clash with other tribes over who gets what. Black Bear nodded silently. You're right. The Moxigan tribe will indeed see such changes in the future. But I'm worried. If the Moxigan becomes wealthy, as you describe, it might attract the attention and jealousy of neighboring tribes. From what I hear, the Moxigan tribe has more enemies than friends. Black Bear's brain was indeed sharp. He'd actually thought of this, and Zhao Hongai was truly impressed. I'm glad you thought of that, but you don't have to worry so much. Zhao Hongai thought Black Bear's worry was unnecessary for the time being. He would never let such a thing happen. Besides, the Moxigan tribe was the largest in the area, with a large population. If a conflict or war were to arise, the Mohawk tribe could easily handle it. Besides, with Zhao Hongai's help, how could they possibly handle those smaller surrounding tribes? Unless the surrounding tribes united, but even if they did, who could guarantee they would work together for the greater good? People are selfish, even the simple Indians are no exception. History has proven this. The white people conquered the Americas using this very tactic, never uniting the Indians. They left them scattered, ultimately allowing the white people to dominate the continent. Was Zhao Hongai any less capable than the white people of 1620? Zhao Hongai curled his lips imperceptibly. The young Indians were passionate and enthusiastic, while the old men were truly political creatures. With such people in control of the tribes, they would be easily defeated. If we start trading, you'll have to let go of the gold mine. You'll need to select a trusted confidant to manage it. Most importantly, you must be able to control this confidant. With my help, you'll establish a trade caravan escort group, specifically responsible for protecting trade with force. Black Bear pondered for a moment, then asked, like the white mercenaries. Zhao Hongai nodded, then shook his head. Somewhat similar, but not quite. Zhao Hongai explained to Black Bear, I say similar because the caravan escorts also rely on force to ensure the safety of our mercenaries. I say different because you're acting for the benefit of the tribe, while the white mercenaries are motivated by personal gain. They're completely different. After saying this, Zhao Hongai lowered his voice. I believe that once this organization is established, virtually all of the Mohawks' military power will be under its control. And once you control this armed force, you'll have more say, won't you? Chapter 54 drops. P.S. While working on this book, I encountered all sorts of things, which had a significant impact on the writing process. The internal turmoil at Kidian also had some impact. My wife has also recently shown signs of pregnancy. I took her for a checkup this afternoon, and my mind is even more swirling. I'm actually both happy and conflicted. Happy because if the test shows it's true, I'll soon be a father. The dilemma is that I haven't made any money yet, and getting pregnant at this time, financially. Ugh. What do you want? Zhao Hongai's words made Black Bear feel uneasy. Yes, these words made Black Bear break out in a cold sweat, though he didn't know why. But deep down, he felt something was amiss. Why did he want to say? What was the point of controlling the Mohawks' armed forces? The Mohawk tribe still had a leader, Samara. Seeing Black Bear's flustered expression, Zhao Hongai smiled. Don't overthink it. I didn't mean any harm, he comforted Black Bear before continuing. I remember discussing this with you earlier. Samara is a good leader, and I admit that. But you also know that this continent is no longer the continent our ancestors once knew. Zhao Hongai had always claimed to be an Indian, so the Mohicans believed him to be, as he claimed, an Indian from the north. It was precisely because of this relationship that Zhao Hongai was able to seamlessly integrate into the Mohican tribe and avoid being treated as an alien. Of course, Zhao Hongai's merchandise and the fair prices he offered played a significant role. Yes, ever since the white people arrived here, we've seen so many changes. Many tribes that once revered nature have become obsessed with profit. Thinking of the changes over the years, Black Bear sighed and echoed Zhao Hongai. How could Zhao Hongai not know all this history? While he didn't know it in detail, he had read some of it in 21st century textbooks and various magazines. The Mohican tribe can't continue like this. Changes must be made. Otherwise, the situation in my tribe will be the same as the Mohicans' future. Zhao Hongai decided to once again unleash his big liar aura to briefly brainwash Black Bear. Hey Tong, what exactly happened to your tribe? What's happening now? Although Zhao Hongyu had told the Mohicans that he was from a northern tribe and the leader's son, and that his tribe was currently at war with the white people in the north, the Mohicans didn't know the details. And Zhao Hongyu's goods were all shipped from the sea by his tribe, and so were his subordinates. This was extremely puzzling. If his tribe was at war with the white people, why didn't he, the leader's son, return? Black Bear's mind was filled with questions. Furthermore, judging by the goods Zhao Hongyu traded with him, his tribe must be quite powerful. Otherwise, how could they possibly have produced those goods? Upon hearing this, Zhao Hongyu's mind raced, thinking of a possible excuse. Simply put, he began to make up a lie. Ahem. Zhao Hongyu sat up, coughed, and then told Black Bear, "My tribe is not doing well right now. The white people from the north have joined forces with other Indian tribes to attack us. Last night, my father sent 5 more people over. They relayed the current situation, and they were not optimistic." Zhao Hongyu then stole a glance at Black Bear for his reaction. There are white people in the north, too? Are they still that powerful? In 1620, communication was pre-existing. Being able to access information within a 100-mile radius was already a remarkable feat. Black Bear had no idea what was happening in Canada. It was precisely because of this certainty that Zhao Hongyu dared to deceive him. Yes, of course. The white people in the north are quite powerful, and their population is huge. Zhao Hongyu deliberately exaggerated, making the French seem incredibly powerful. God forbid, the French population near Quebec only numbered a little over 30,000. And that's counting the population of all the immigrant camps combined. If the numbers were spread out, the population of the dozens of settlements would be pitifully small. But it didn't matter. Black Bear didn't know. Black Bear had to take Zhao Hongyu at his word. He had no way of verifying it himself. "Hey Tong, how many people are in your tribe?" 100,000. "My tribe is in the north, and it's a very large one. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to fight every tribe there, and at the same time, wage war against the white people." Zhao Hongyu thought for a moment and then said a figure of 100,000. He had originally wanted to say 1 million, but he was worried it would scare Black Bear, so he deliberately understated it. Even so, Black Bear was stunned. "Oh my god, a tribe of 100,000 people, what kind of concept is that?" Black Bear had originally thought his tribe was already large, but he hadn't expected Zhao Hongyu's tribe to be even larger. "With such a large tribe, we can wipe out any enemy. Why do you still say the current situation isn't optimistic?" "I think you're worrying too much," Black Bear asked, bewildered, finally recovering from his shock. "Okay, this guy finally asked this question. Now I'm going to start brainwashing him and preparing him for his future as leader of the Mohawks." Zhao Hongyu chuckled inwardly, but feigned an expression of grief and indignation. "My father, like Chief Samra, was a moderate." In Zhao Hongyu's account, he described his father as conservative, old-fashioned, and inflexible. This was exactly the same as Chief Samra, with even more exaggeration. "I told him long ago that white people are greedy. If we have something good, they'll definitely try to cheat us out of it. If that doesn't work, they'll incite the surrounding tribes to wage war to achieve their goals." Zhao Hongyu spoke bitterly, while Black Bear remained serious. "Many small tribes around ours have been destroyed by white people using similar tactics. This is a huge warning to us. We must be on guard." "Yes, the white people do have bad intentions." Black Bear nodded in agreement. He empathized with what Zhao Hongyu said. The Mohegan tribe was facing a similar situation. Although the white people near Virginia hadn't done anything to the Mohegan tribe, some of the smaller tribes surrounding the Mohegan tribe, or even those near Virginia, had already suffered the same destruction as Zhao Hongyu described. How could this be so similar? Black Bear was well aware of the white people's greed for land, forests, animal furs, and all sorts of resources. To obtain the wealth the white people talked about, they would wage war. Even more tragically, some Indian tribes voluntarily sided with the whites, becoming assimilated and becoming their lackeys. The Punks, whose tribe had earlier killed Baker's guide, Sandori, were one such tribe. They also used the whites' currency and became just as greedy as the whites themselves. To earn that white stone currency, the Punks expended considerable effort in wars both large and small, bringing disaster to numerous smaller tribes and earning a notorious reputation. There were many other tribes like the Punks who had sided with the whites, and when they united, they were a formidable force, even surpassing the Mohawks. What if the whites of Virginia were like those in the north? Black Bear's face darkened at the thought. Seeing Black Bear's expression shift, Zhao Hongyu knew his words had some effect. Hey, I'm trying to get you to assume the worst. Only if you think of the worst will you follow my line of thought. Zhao Hongyu chuckled inwardly, feeling that his deception skills seemed to have improved. Hey Tong, you just said your tribe was attacked by all the northern tribes? Black Bear, coming to his senses, immediately recalled something Zhao Hongyu had said, which made him pause. Yes, they all became the white people's lackeys because they could provide them with bread and food. Zhao Hongyu's lies were unfounded. That's impossible. Don't you have food too? Black Bear asked in astonishment. Zhao Hongyu's tribe also had food, so the northern tribes wouldn't help the white people just because of that, right? Zhao Hongyu was also stunned, but he quickly realized. The white people's food is better, tastier than our rice, so those tribes helped them. It was a lame excuse, but Zhao Hongyu couldn't think of a better one or explanation for a moment. Fortunately, Black Bear believed it. God bless him, or he'd be exposed. Seeing Black Bear's look of sudden enlightenment, Zhao Hongyu prayed in his heart. Can white people offer anything better? I'm a bit skeptical. Black Bear curled his lips. In my opinion, the rice you're trading with us is already the best food. After hearing Black Bear's words, Zhao Hongyu thought to himself, of course, those Frenchmen in the north and the British in Virginia are just unsophisticated in my eyes. They only eat oats now, which, when cooked, is a mushy, awful mess. What good things do they have? But if I didn't say that, how could I possibly fool you? These were Zhao Hongyu's inner thoughts and dynamics, but he certainly wouldn't show them, and he would never speak the truth to Black Bear. Zhao Hongyu and Black Bear continued to discuss this issue. Zhao Hongyu's deliberate exaggeration of the white people in the north only deepened Black Bear's wariness of them. He also began to worry that the surrounding tribes might be swayed by the whites. The tribal leader, Samra, had always maintained a peaceful attitude, which also made Black Bear worried. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55, Break Away from the Moxigan Tribe. After conversing with Black Bear, Zhao Hongyu and Wang Shan returned to Manhattan Island. The next morning, Black Bear arrived at Zhao Hongyu's territory, bringing with him over 300 slaves from the Mohawk tribe. These slaves were the product of wars waged by the Mohawk against neighboring tribes in previous years, and were now all sold to Zhao Hongyu. Zhao Hongyu only had to pay 2 tons of rice. How much was 2 tons of rice? If 2 tons of old rice were priced at 2 yuan per caddy, 1 ton would only be worth 4,000 yuan. Note, 1 ton is 2,000 caddies. 2 tons of rice only cost 8,000 yuan, which in the 21st century would be more than the monthly salary of over 300 workers, so, Zhao Hongyu considered this a very good deal. Of course, this also had to do with his perspective. In the eyes of the Mohawk, they believed Zhao Hongyu had suffered a great loss. These over 300 slaves were all women, the elderly, and children. For the Mohicans, these people were completely useless. Now, being able to exchange them for 2 tons of rice was an incredible blessing. Keeping these people within the Mohican tribe would have been nothing more than a waste of food. Historically, without Zhao Hongyu, these people would have been sold to the whites. But now, with Zhao Hongyu's appearance, history has been altered. They have all become Zhao Hongyu's slaves, a fate no one could have foreseen. Chief, we can't rashly give these slaves tools. After all, we're short on manpower right now, and we're worried about something happening. Thinking of the number of slaves, Wang Shan warned Zhao Hongyu with some concern. Zhao Hongyu smiled and said, they're all elderly, weak, sick, and women. We'll be fine if we're careful. Besides, we don't have the tools to cultivate the land. He was right. While they had a wealth of goods, they lack agricultural tools. Zhao Hongyu couldn't even procure a simple hoe. Chief, are we just going to keep these slaves for free? Wang Shan felt it was a disservice to keep them fed. Even though they were old, weak, and infirm, they still had plenty to eat. Furthermore, to prevent these slaves from dying so quickly and to ensure they could generate economic benefits in the future, Wang Shan had to provide them with housing, building a number of large yurts for them to live in. There's nothing we can do about it. Are we going to expect these women to cultivate the land with their bare hands? That's unrealistic. Just keep them. Some food doesn't cost much, Zhao Hongyu said to Wang Shan with a helpless shrug. And I won't keep them for free. While I'm not a ruthless boss, I'm not going to be a 1620-era Lei Feng either. Chief, if these people can't work, what else can they do? Wang Shan asked, puzzled, unable to imagine what else these slaves could do. Go cut down trees, let these women cut down trees. We have to find something for them to do. I won't keep them for nothing. Since I'm a slave owner, I have to give up some of my conscience. Besides, in this era, it's hard for me to survive if I'm not a bit ruthless. Zhao Hongyu's expression changed, and Wang Shan could see that his chief was deeply conflicted. It was easy to say, but actually doing it would still be a psychological barrier. It's true that Indians are indigenous, but they are also human beings. They are living people, not animals. But Wang Shan also knew that Zhao Hongyu had to do this. If Zhao Hongyu didn't, Wang Shan would remind him. If you want to be a slave owner, you must adopt the mentality of a slave owner. It's better to put your conscience aside as soon as possible. Chief, there's nothing to feel bad about. Think about those white people. They wouldn't be like you. Wang Shan used the example of how white people treat black people to persuade Zhao Hongyu to let go of his psychological burden. Don't worry, I'm fine. Knowing Wang Shan was trying to persuade him again, Zhao Hongyu let a grimace slip onto his face. Hey Tong, I'll leave these 50 soldiers behind to help you look after the slaves. From now on, they'll be your men. I know you're short-handed right now, so please don't refuse. At that moment, Black Bear, the slave delivery man, came over and shouted at Zhao Hongyu. Hey Tong, a pillow just when you're sleepy. Black Bear is the real Lei Feng, I bet. Wang Shan lowered his head and muttered softly. You're the one who talks too much, stop talking. Zhao Hongyu put on a stern face and feigned intimidation. Thank you so much. I was just worried about how to manage so many slaves. Zhao Hongyu smiled and approached Black Bear, stretching his arms out for a hug and punching him on the back. Bang, bang, bang. Well, the harder you hit, the stronger your friendship. Damn it, you've broken all my bones. Zhao Hongyu internally complained about the Mohawk's polite greeting. Despite his inner complaints, he had to appear cheerful, which was truly agonizing. Releasing Zhao Hongyu, Black Bear chuckled and said, these slaves are now yours. We Mohawks won't care about their lives from now on. But I'm still a little confused, what do you plan to do with them? Black Bear was deeply curious, he wondered what these women could do. In his opinion, Zhao Hongyu buying these slaves was a loss. But since it was a willing battle, and since it would also benefit the Mohawk tribe, Black Bear agreed. However, Zhao Hongyu was his friend, someone he truly considered a brother. Therefore, he felt bad about having tricked Zhao Hongyu this time. I planned to have them cut wood. I need a lot of wood. I was a little worried at first because I was short of manpower and didn't know whether I should give them tools. But now with the 50 people you sent, I don't have to worry anymore. Go cut wood. Black Bear looked at the slaves who were so weak that they even trembled when they walked and shook his head. They are so weak, how can they still work? Black Bear was a little unsure about this. However, it's good that they can do the work, otherwise Zhao Hongyu would really lose money. As for how Zhao Hongyu uses these slaves, and whether they live or die, none of my business. After thinking this through, Black Bear stopped thinking about this problem. Okay, as long as they can do the work, I'm relieved. You know, these people are just a waste of food. They can't do anything in the Moxigan tribe. Black Bear raised his hand and patted Zhao Hongyu on the shoulder. Just because you can't work in Mohican doesn't mean you can't work here. We don't keep idle people here. If you want to eat, you have to work. Of course, I won't be too picky about food, I'll definitely make sure they have enough. Zhao Hongyu was right. While he didn't intend to be a good person, he didn't intend to become a cruel and dark slave owner. Believing that treating slaves well would help them generate better economic returns. After all, living slaves were more valuable than dead ones. And if you want people to work, then having enough food is a prerequisite. You can't expect people to work without feeding them. How can someone work more if they don't have enough food? Zhao Hongyu understood this principle. Oh, by the way, Brother Haitong, I won these 50 people over from the old leader. They're here to look after these slaves, so you have to keep them fed. Black Bear suddenly remembered this and reminded him. Zhao Hongyu nodded. Don't worry, I won't treat them unfairly when they work for me. With Zhao Hongyu's assurance, Black Bear felt reassured. Everyone in the Moxigan tribe knew Haitong was a man who kept his promises, so Black Bear didn't think Zhao Hongai would deceive him. If you want them to stay, that's fine. Just bring their families over. Settling them on Manhattan Island will help them work more diligently, Black Bear said to Zhao Hongai in a low voice, a slightly eerie expression on his face. Huh? This surprised Zhao Hongai. Bring their families over. This wasn't a big deal for Zhao Hongai. It was just a matter of building a few more yurts. But the problem was, what would the Moxigan elders think if these people's families came over? He had to be careful not to misunderstand him and think he was poaching Moxigan members. If he grew stronger, he wouldn't worry about what others would think. But right now, he wasn't. Therefore, he had to be cautious and maintain friendly relations with the Moxigan tribe. And most importantly, if these people lived here, wouldn't his lies be exposed? After all, he was deceiving the Mohicans, selling goods that were shipped by sea from his own tribe. With these 50 Mohican warriors living in Manhattan, his lies would surely be exposed. Black Bear had no idea of Zhao Hongayu's current thoughts, nor the turmoil he was feeling. Actually, these warriors are frustrated members of the Mohican tribe. They, like me, deeply hate white people. Unfortunately, their ideals, like mine, are not accepted within the Mohican tribe, and they are therefore ostracized. Black Bear continued, his voice low. I'm better off than them. After all, I'm a warrior within the tribe. But they're not so lucky. Life is very difficult for them. Zhao Hongyu suddenly came to his senses and listened quietly to Black Bear's words. I can guarantee they're all fierce warriors. Actually, I brought them out this time to find a place that would accept them. I can see you hate white people, don't you? A light bulb went off in Zhao Hongyu's head, and he asked, are you saying they want to leave the Moxigan tribe? Chapter 56, Accepting them, there is no harm. After hearing Black Bear's words, Zhao Hongyu's mind stirred, a flash of inspiration dawning on him, as if a light had fallen on his eyes. Black Bear, are you saying these 50 warriors have left the Moxigan tribe? Zhao Hongyu had a point in asking this, for Black Bear's words hinted at this very idea. Something about being frustrated within the tribe, their ideals not being shared by everyone. Especially Black Bear's point about the warriors' intense hatred of white people. Black Bear looked at Zhao Hongyu seriously, give them something to eat, and they'll be yours from now on. Elder Samurai of the Moxigan tribe has been suppressing us. Now I think following you is a good choice. Zhao Hongyu was a little stunned. He only had 20 men, and the Moxigan tribe was truly a behemoth. Even if Zhao Hongyu was bragging and fabricating a massive tribe, it wouldn't have been so appealing to Black Bear. There had to be some other reason. Zhao Hongyu didn't believe he possessed any sort of charismatic aura that could have so awed Black Bear. Black Bear, tell the truth. There's no need for these hypocritical words between you and me. I want to know what your plan is. Otherwise, I wouldn't dare leave these 50 people behind. Zhao Hongyu was no fool. Clearly, there was something wrong here. If he rashly left these people here, what would samurai say? You know, in the Americas, population is the absolute foundation of a tribe's strength. Black Bear's approach was tantamount to putting Zhao Hongyu in opposition to the Mohawks. If not handled properly, this could lead to serious consequences. Black Bear fell silent after hearing this, then stared at Zhao Hongyu intently for a long time. Zhao Hongyu stared at Black Bear, not to be outdone. The two of them stared at each other for about a minute. In the end, it was Black Bear who gave in first. He relaxed his tense muscles, exhaled a long breath, and said to Zhao Hongyu, what you said to me yesterday, I've thought about it carefully since I got home, and it makes perfect sense. The white people's greed is boundless, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. And the best way to solve this problem is to kill all those white people. Otherwise, what happened to your tribe will be what our Moxigan tribe will face in the future. Yesterday, during a casual chat with Black Bear, Zhao Hongyu recounted the fate of his tribe. It was almost identical to Black Bear's own Moxigan tribe. The white people co-opted smaller tribes, weakened the larger ones, and slowly eroded the larger tribes' territory and living space. Over time, the larger tribes gradually weakened. Once the larger tribes weakened, the white people would seize the opportunity and, like a venomous snake, deliver a fatal blow. How similar it was. Zhao Hongyu's tribe mirrored the entire process of the Moxigan tribe. This made Black Bear feel uneasy. The Moxigan tribe today was facing the same problem. However, power within the tribe rests with Elder Samurai, who favors stability over war. In the face of the whites' relentless pressure, Samra has always prioritized peace. It's not that Samra's actions were wrong, there's nothing wrong with being peace-loving. It's just that his actions only emboldened the whites and led neighboring tribes to believe the Mohicans were weak and vulnerable. Last year, a small tribe affiliated with the Mohicans was destroyed by the whites and some smaller tribes that had joined them, while the Mohicans, acting as protectors, remained silent. This wavered in the hearts of many tribes, even those affiliated with them. However, the whites' gift of 10 muskets persuaded Samra to forgive the attack. The Mohicans even spared no one from pursuing the smaller tribes that had joined the attack and had sided with the whites. Didn't Samra realize that his actions would leave the Mohicans isolated and vulnerable? Black Bear was on the side that supported the Mohicans, but unfortunately, few supported him. So, the matter was left unresolved. Not long afterward, his son was murdered and his body abandoned in the wilderness. In early winter, his daughter Emma was assaulted. All of this foreshadowed something. Unfortunately, Black Bear could muster only a limited number of warriors, otherwise, he would have led a vengeance long ago. Of course, more importantly, Black Bear couldn't bear to put his people in danger for his own revenge. This was a personal matter, not something that the entire tribe could be implicated. Black Bear still had a modicum of conscience. Just as he was drifting off into daze, ready to muddle through life, Zhao Hongyu appeared. When Baker showed signs of hostility, he decisively attacked without hesitation, eliminating Baker and his men. This approach suited Black Bear perfectly. It also revealed something to Black Bear. Zhao Hongyu, like him, held a deep disdain for white people. They shared a dislike for them, yet they were not afraid of them and were willing to fight them. Suddenly, Black Bear felt he had found a kindred spirit, a comrade with shared ideals. This, combined with their recent interactions and Zhao Hongyu's words yesterday, was a powerful reminder of Black Bear's approach. This prompted Black Bear to make a decision, to leave the Mohawk tribe and strike out on his own with Zhao Hongyu. Black Bear's idea was, admittedly, crazy, but also very realistic. What? You said we should go it alone. After hearing Black Bear's plan, Zhao Hongyu wondered if he was crazy, or if Black Bear had gone mad. Yes, I will contact any warriors within the Mohawk tribe who harbor hatred for white people and have them join our ranks. I will also leverage trade opportunities with surrounding tribes to connect with warriors from those tribes. When our strength grows, we can decide for ourselves whether to declare war on the whites. Zhao Hongyu's original plan was to support Black Bear in his position as leader of the Mohawk tribe. Otherwise, Zhao Hongyu wouldn't have worked so hard to build Black Bear's reputation. But Zhao Hongyu never imagined that Black Bear would actually want to abandon the Mohawk tribe and strike out on his own. What Zhao Hongyu admired about Black Bear was his hatred for white people and his courage to take action against them. These were definitely the strengths of the master fighter. But why did he want to go it alone? Hey, Black Bear, some things can't be rushed. I originally planned to support you in taking the position of leader of the Mohawks. By then, you'd be in full control, Zhao Hongyu said to Black Bear with deep sorrow. Chief, the slaves are settled. Wang Shan had settled the slaves and returned to Zhao Hongyu to ask for instructions on the next steps. Zhao Hongyu gave Black Bear an apologetic look and turned to Wang Shan, saying, "It's getting late. Prepare them for dinner. After dinner, have them set up their tents. We might have more people here." Wang Shan nodded and left to make arrangements. After watching Wang Shan leave, Zhao Hongyu turned back to Black Bear and continued to look at him. "Tell me about it. You must have your reasons. I need to wait and see before making a decision." Zhao Hongyu didn't want to make a rash decision. Black Bear's desire to go it alone was not impossible, but Zhao Hongyu wanted to know his true intentions. "Hey Tong, I understand your kindness and am deeply grateful. But don't forget, even if I become leader, what good will it do? I won't necessarily have the final say," Black Bear said, looking rather helpless. The opinions of the tribal elders can sometimes constrain the leader's decisions. Black Bear was absolutely right. Even if he became leader, he wouldn't necessarily be able to carry out his ideals. So, considering this, Black Bear pondered for an entire night and finally made a decision. If that were the case, why not find a way to go it alone? As long as he broke away from the Mohawk tribe, he could do whatever he wanted. Of course, he couldn't leave the Mohawk tribe for the time being. But he could contact those warriors who harbored grudges against the white people and get them to join Zhao Hongyu's side. Zhao Hongyu was short on manpower, which presented an opportunity. Black Bear believed he would definitely accept anyone who came to him. Furthermore, Zhao Hongyu had plenty of food, so those warriors could easily survive and wait for their chance at revenge. This is my plan. I'm not cut out to be a leader. But I can see that you, He Tong, could be a qualified leader. So, are you willing to form a tribe? Black Bear asked Zhao Hongyu seriously. Willing to form a tribe? Zhao Hongyu was willing from the bottom of his heart, but he found it a little unbelievable. How can I trust these people? I can trust you, but how can I trust them? Yes, these 50 Mohican warriors were recruited by Black Bear. Clearly, Black Bear held a higher position in their hearts than he did. So, if they really did form a tribe in the future, would they listen to him or Black Bear? Zhao Hongyu didn't want to be a fool who only helped others. They're not Mohicans, but survivors of the Nuka tribe, which was destroyed by the white people last year. They're now temporarily living in the Mohicans for refuge. They'll fight for whoever can bring them revenge. Black Bear revealed the true identity of the 50 warriors. After hearing Black Bear's words, Zhao Hongyu fell silent. They're all natural warriors and they know the white people very well. They can use the white people's weapons that can make thunder, and they are very skilled. If you can get the white people's weapons, then you will know the benefits of keeping them. What? These warriors can also use matchlock guns. This surprised Zhao Hongyu. Chapter 57 Manhattan Island Guard is established. It's not surprising that Indians could use arquebuses. Ever since Columbus discovered America, Europeans have been arriving in this new world. They brought not only carnage and greed, but also a weapon the Indians had never seen before, the arquebus. Of course, the most troublesome things the white people brought with them were smallpox and anthrax. Before firing, arquebuses emit puffs of smoke and a deafening roar. When the Indians first encountered them, they thought they were magical artifacts capable of launching thunderbolts, but as time passed and Indians and Europeans came into contact, they discovered that arquebuses were actually weapons. As a result, the Indians learned how to use them, and some even achieved better accuracy than even Europeans. Over 150 years have passed since Columbus discovered America. In that long period, the Indians weren't fools, so learning to use arquebuses wasn't impossible. Zhao Hongyu, having figured this out, gradually relaxed, his expression no longer frightened. After all, he'd been baptized by 21st century American blockbusters. So many of them featured scenes of Indians wielding muskets. Black Eye, keeping them here won't do you any harm. These people harbor deep-seated hatred for white people. They're definitely like-minded, you can be completely assured of that, Black Bear kept reminding him. Zhao Hongyu had no other thoughts. Increasing his manpower was always a good thing, so he wouldn't refuse. Black Bear, you said they're not from the Mohawk tribe? Black Bear nodded. Don't worry, they're definitely not. So they can decide where they want to go. It's their freedom. You don't have to worry about it causing you any trouble. Absolutely not. Alright, since you say so, then I won't ask any more questions. Zhao Hongyu nodded. From then on, these 50 homeless Indian warriors became Zhao Hongyu's men. However, Zhao Hongyu's personal attributes didn't change much with the addition of these 50 men. It seemed that only by increasing the number of genetically engineered individuals could Zhao Hongyu upgrade his civil administration. This left Zhao Hongyu frustrated, but he had no choice but to accept it. Black Bear bid farewell to Zhao Hongyu. He still had to select capable young warriors within the next few days, as Zhao Hongyu had suggested, to form a caravan. After seeing Black Bear off, Zhao Hongyu gathered Wang Shen and the others. He looked at Wang Shen, Zhang Tai, Song Hu, the 12 taciturn genetically engineered individuals, and the 5 newly trained men and women. There are quite a few more Indians around our camp now. Most are slaves, and there are also dozens of Indians Black Bear has sent to join us. Wang Shen and the others were aware of this situation. However, they still listened quietly to Zhao Hongyu's words. You all need to be strong. The care of the slaves will be left to the newly arrived 50 Indian warriors. Your job is to keep an eye on those 50 Indians. At the latest, Black Bear will send their families over tomorrow. We need to quickly brainwash them and fully integrate them into our group. There were now over 300 slaves and 50 more warriors. Zhao Hongyu's group suddenly seemed to have expanded considerably. However, Zhao Hongyu knew that the core of this group was Wang Shen and his fellow geneticists. Without them, he would be left alone. Jin Hu, here, once those Indian families arrive on Manhattan Island, You must immediately start a study session. You will teach the language and brainwash those children into believing that our Chinese history is Indian history. How you convince them is up to you. Beyond that, you can teach simple math like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Nothing else is necessary. Jinhu nodded. Okay, Chief, I know what to do. After a few days of rest and a change of heart, the geneticist Jinhu had completely accepted the fact that she had appeared in 1620 and was no longer so hesitant. Zhang Tai, you will continue to run your small shop within the Mohican tribe and trade with them. Zhang Tai nodded. Yes, my leader. Song Hu, you will lead the security of Manhattan Island. The Nujin humans will be assigned to you, and you will form the Manhattan Island Guard to oversee law and order and defense. Song Hu was very pleased with this arrangement. He loved military-related matters. Leave it to me, no problem. I will absolutely protect Manhattan Island, Song Hu assured Zhao Hongyu earnestly. But then a look of helplessness crossed his face. He said, I need to teach little Emma martial arts soon. If I take charge of Manhattan Island's defense, she'll give up. Zhao Hongyu rolled his eyes after hearing Song Hu's words. Are you stupid? You won't let her come to Manhattan Island? Oh, that's right. I won't be going to the Mohawk tribe anymore, but I can let the little one come to Manhattan Island. I'm such a fool not to have thought of that. Song Hu patted his forehead with a hand and said with a silly grin. Over 300 slaves don't need 50 warriors to guard them. 20 will be enough. Zhao Hongyu put away his helpless expression and looked at Song Hu seriously. Seeing Zhao Hongyu's seriousness, Song Hu also put away his silly expression. Choose 20 from those 50 to join your defense team. Not only will it reduce their numbers, but we can also keep an eye on them at the same time. This will be beneficial to us, Zhao Hongyu stated his plan. Yes, the 300 female slaves weren't a big deal, but the 50 Indian warriors couldn't be looked at that way. I'm going back to the White Camp soon to buy some slaves, and I'll take 10 of them with me before I leave. By then, there will only be 20 left. These 20 will be responsible for keeping watch over the female slaves, so they can't cause any major trouble. Song Hu thought Zhao Hongyu's approach was quite sound. Chief, you're really smart. I wouldn't have thought of that. Looking at Wang Shan's idiotic expression, Zhao Hongyu continued to roll his eyes. You're stupid? I wouldn't believe it. You're not stupid at all, you just don't want to use your brain. If you used your brain more, there's no way you wouldn't have thought of a problem like this, and how could you not solve it? Zhao Hongyu knew Wang Shan, Zhang Tai, and Song Hu all too well. They were all quite intelligent, but due to their different personalities, they channeled their intelligence elsewhere. Wang Shan, for example, channeled his intelligence into being his own lackeys. Zhang Tai, on the other hand, used his cleverness to defraud and profit from the Indians. As for Song Hu, he was preoccupied with becoming a general and an instructor ready to fight in battle. The three men had completely different personalities and approached their work in different ways. Leader, just let you make the overall decisions. We, your subordinates, will just follow your lead. Hey, Song Hu continued with a silly grin, his naive demeanor making him appear quite honest. Whatever you say, I only ask that you keep an eye on our Manhattan Island and ensure that those 20 Indians who join the defense team are truly won over. Song Hu nodded emphatically. If Song Hu forms the guard, and we become stronger in the future, won't this guy be able to become the Minister of Defense? Wang Shan nudged Zhang Tai, whispering to him with a grin. Upon hearing this, Zhang Tai responded, stay with the leader. When we rise to prominence, you'll also be able to become Prime Minister and Chief Steward. Think about it. We all came from humble beginnings. If we follow the leader, we might become rich and handsome fathers. Zhang Tai's expression was as lewd as it could be. Wang Shan chuckled and said, you're not bad at all. You'll eventually become Minister of Finance. I've finally seen it clearly. As long as the three of us work hard to help the leader, the future is definitely not a dream. The two of them were whispering to each other, and Zhao Hongyu naturally didn't notice. After arranging everything, Zhao Hongyu dismissed everyone to go about their business. Leader, when are we going to contact the white people? After everyone dispersed, Wang Shan, Zhao Hongyu's personal henchman and lackey, came to Zhao Hongyu's side and whispered. Go and select 10 Indian warriors sent by Black Bear. We'll leave tomorrow. Wang Shan nodded. Chief, we don't have much money. Those Europeans only care about money. How could they possibly do business with us without it? Zhao Hongyu was silent for a moment before saying to Wang Shan, don't show off your wealth. We can't bring gold with us, or they'll definitely steal our gold mines. I'd like to trade with them for food, but we don't have a cart, and we can't carry much food by manpower. Wang Shan's reminder reminded Zhao Hongyu of some of the more troublesome obstacles. After some further thought, Zhao Hongyu said to Wang Shan, "Never mind. Let's select 10 people first. Let's put this plan on hold for now. When we can build a cart, we'll contact the white people." With no other choice, Zhao Hongyu had no choice but to put the plan on hold. "Okay, Chief, I'll go select 10 people right away." Humph. With 50 people dispersed, it would be much safer. Chapter 58. I created a Q party. In the days that followed, the young men of the Mohawk tribe heeded Black Bear's call and joined the Foreign Trade Guard. They trained diligently daily, preparing for the launch of foreign trade. At the same time, Black Bear, following Zhao Hongyu's suggestion, periodically brainwashed the young Mohawk warriors with historical stories about the white man's arrival in America. These stories primarily focused on the white man's greed, murder, and arson. Once or twice, everyone listened to them as history, but what would happen over time? Black Bear had no idea what would happen, but Zhao Hongyu knew. He simply didn't tell Black Bear. Since Zhao Hongyu had said so, Black Bear obeyed. He didn't understand. Just telling stories would be enough? Unlike within the Mohawk tribe, Zhao Hongyu and his men on Manhattan Island also began vigorous military training. Following Zhao Hongyu's instructions, Song Hu established a Manhattan Island Defense Force. Song Hu originally had 4 men under his command, but Zhao Hongyu also gave him a newly cultivated female and 3 male geneticists, and asked him to select 20 from the 50 warriors Black Bear had sent him. This brought Song Hu's defense force to a total of 28. Zhang Tai continued to trade within the Mohican tribe, but recently, many people who had purchased labor protection military-grade black cotton coats had come to him, complaining that they became itchy after wearing them for a long time. Some even developed dense blisters. Zhang Tai, facing this situation, revealed his talent as a ruthless businessman. He told the Mohicans that the clothes had been worn for too long and that they would be fine after washing them in the summer. Zhang Tai would not tell the Mohicans the real reason. Even if he did, they probably wouldn't understand what black cotton meant. It was clear that Zhang Tai had the makings of a ruthless boss, as evidenced by this. Wang Shan accompanied Zhao Hongyu, accompanied by his 4 geneticists. He also selected 10 Indian warriors and trained them daily. From now on, they would serve as Zhao Hongyu's bodyguards. The remaining 20 Indian warriors became managers of the 300 or so slaves. Due to lack of tools, the land on Manhattan Island could not be cultivated. However, these 300 slaves couldn't just eat for free, so Zhao Hongyu had them escorted to the forest every day and given low-quality iron axes to chop wood. Every night, the female slaves were escorted back to Manhattan Island to rest. Of the 300 or so female slaves, half were elderly, weak, and young, and only half were capable of working. Therefore, of the 300 slaves, only a little over 100 could be assigned to logging. And the progress was slow, given that they were all women. The young slaves were selected and given to Jinhu as students. Jinhu was responsible for brainwashing them, instilling bizarre historical knowledge and loyalty to Zhao Hongyu. The elderly women were unable to do anything, so Jinhu taught them sewing and mending skills, helping them mend clothes and avoid being idle. Similarly, the female gene transmitter assigned to Song Hu became the political commissar of the Manhattan Island Guard, specifically tasked with instilling a sense of community and a modified version of the 8th Root Army system in the 20 Indian warriors. It must be said that Song Hu was a man of devious ideas. He understood Zhao Hongyu's intention to gradually divide and integrate the 50 Indian warriors. After much reflection, Song Hu felt that the method used by his predecessors was the right one. After all, it was a time-tested method. At the grievance meeting, Song Hu had the Indians recount their painful experiences, sparking sympathy. Ultimately, the Hong Army trope from the admissions office's history was spot on. In a short period of time, Song Hu had transformed these 20 Indians into his own people. The female Genet, with her endlessly eloquent and profound eloquence, instilled a deep fear in the Indians. She never got angry, always reasoning with you. You couldn't win an argument with her, and in the end, you'd be left speechless. Therefore, the 20 Indian warriors feared and hated her, yet also admired her. The 20 Indians guarding the slaves, along with the 10 Indians selected by Zhao Hongyu, were constantly rotated to Song Hu's guard unit for training, absorbing the Hong Army philosophy. Over time, these 50 men were spiritually transformed. Of course, the Hong army philosophy instilled in them was certainly revised. For example, song titles like Defeat the Landlords and so on were not to be instilled. Instead, the primary focus was on targeting the white people. Combining the ideals of revenge, hatred of white people, and sound guidance, Zhao Hongyu easily won the hearts of the 50 Indians. After listening to Song Hu's report, Zhao Hongyu was deeply satisfied. It must be said that these methods of our predecessors truly worked. But then again, if they didn't, how could they have conquered the land? Okay, pay attention to their thoughts. Although they hate white people, we can't conflict with them anytime soon. After all, we're still weak, and there's no significant benefit to be gained from a conflict with them. So we must help them suppress their hatred. I'll leave this ideological work to you. Zhao Hongyu delivered new instructions to Song Hu, who was reporting on his work. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed. It was late spring, May. The Mohican tribe's foreign trade was booming. The most popular items among the surrounding tribes were rice, or guo tao, pickled mustard tubers, and matches. Of course, iron axes and machetes were also valuable, but they weren't selling as well as the above goods. The expansion of foreign trade had greatly benefited the Mohican people. Their quality of life had greatly improved. Yurts had become the Mohican dwellings, and the original triangular tents were no longer inhabited. It can be said that foreign trade has lifted the Mohican people out of poverty and into a more prosperous life. The spacious yurts are even larger than before, with interior temperatures warm in winter and cool in summer. The food is even better than before. This is a life the Mohicans could never have imagined. Thanks to Black Bear's deliberate efforts, the people of the Mohican tribe all knew about the new life they had gained through their partnership with Black Eyes. Unnoticed, Zhao Hongyu's reputation within the Mohican tribe soared again, something he had never imagined. Zhao Hongyu himself had cultivated another 200 genetic humans in the past 2 months, increasing the strength of his group. These 200 humans consisted of 150 males and 50 females. However, under Zhao Hongyu's orders, all men and women became soldiers. Because they were cultivated one by one, the intellectual development of the humans cultivated in 2 months was normal. Song Hu's Manhattan Guard had expanded, and 150 of the 200 were allocated to him. Because, in Zhao Hongyu's plan, the Manhattan Guard was essentially the equivalent of a national defense force, Zhao Hongyu gathered the 12 taciturn DNA personnel under his command, placing them under the leadership of Wang Shan. Despite their incompetence, they were unwavering in their commitment to protecting Zhao Hongyu, making them perfect guards. The remaining 50 DNA personnel were assigned to Zhang Tai, who was doing business in Mohican. His business was growing, and he was clearly running out of manpower. Therefore, 50 newly trained DNA personnel were allocated to him to fill his manpower shortfall. The 50 Indians Black Bear had sent over 2 months earlier and their families had settled on Manhattan Island. Meanwhile, as Zhao Hongyu's DNA personnel had grown to over 200, he assigned all 50 Indians to slave management. With over 200 under his command, Zhao Hongyu felt more confident. While his forces were still weak, they were no longer the easily bullied he had been 2 months ago. With the increase in his group's manpower, Zhao Hongyu was able to purchase and distribute hundreds of old-fashioned muskets to Song Hu and his Manhattan Guard. With the muskets in hand, Song Hu began training his soldiers in the 5-stage shot. While the musket's accuracy wasn't great, the rapid-fire bursts of fire were quite powerful. These white idiots are still using the outdated Spanish phalanx. Let's start the 2-stroke mode of firing the platoons. After watching the Manhattan Guards drill, Zhao Hongyu snorted and thought to himself, "Captain, what do you think?" After the drill, Song Hu ran up to Zhao Hongyu, eager for his praise. "Not bad. 2 more stages than the 3-stage shot, so we can limit the number of rounds. But with so few men, the power is greatly reduced," Zhao Hongyu commented pretentiously. "Captain, this is already very good. The matchlock's accuracy is too low. And hitting the enemy depends entirely on luck. It's just used to intimidate and demoralize the enemy. Our guards are equipped with matchlocks, machetes, and cross-axes. If a war really breaks out, close combat is likely to occur," Song Hu explained to Zhao Hongyu. "However, in this part of the American continent, I think we can be considered number 1, Wang Shan interrupted at the right time, reminding Zhao Hongyu. The Mohawks, who had been invited to observe the drill, looked at Zhao Hongyu with a strange look. Chapter 59 Samura's Decision. The Mohawk elders had originally come to Manhattan Island solely for Black Bear's sake. They had no interest in the so-called exercise. It was Black Bear's promise that Zhao Hongai would provide everyone with a free lunch after the exercise that had drawn them here. However, after watching the exercise, the Mohawk elders' initial dismissive attitude was completely and utterly changed. Weren't the warriors under Black Eyes wielding the same arquebuses used by the whites? Yes, arquebuses. I never imagined arquebuses could be used like this. It's beyond my expectations. Well, it seems these weapons are truly powerful. What did you notice from this exercise? You're saying something else. I didn't see much, just that this Zhao tribe is powerful. Although only a few hundred were sent to assist them, I saw their strength. That's all you can see. I saw them flaunting their might. The elders were whispering among themselves. Zhao Hongai ignored their reactions, as he had expected them. Instead, he quietly instructed Wang Shan to prepare lunch immediately. After having Song Hu take over the mopping up, he approached a Mohawk elder. 5-shot bursts. This is a fighting method even more powerful than the white men's. Combined with close combat, the white men will no longer seem so formidable. Zhao Hongai spoke calmly and loudly to the Mohawk elders. The Mohawk elders nodded in agreement, agreeing with Zhao Hongai's words. They had watched the entire exercise and were deeply impressed by this. The 5-shot bursts had riddled the wooden targets with holes. And this was despite the poor accuracy of the matchlock muskets, achieving such a high accuracy. A burst of crackling gunfire rang out, like thunderbolts in dry land, shocking the heart. If such an attack were to occur on the battlefield before the two armies even engaged, the morale damage to the troops could be imagined. Especially with such a weapon, half of the enemy's manpower could be wiped out before they could even charge the enemy. How could the war then be fought? More importantly, Zhao Hongai demonstrated a different way of warfare, a new way to use the arquebus, the 5-shot burst mode. This shocked them immensely. This 5-shot burst allowed soldiers to fire continuously, without a single pause. This was the most terrifying thing. Originally, the process of cleaning the barrel, loading the gunpowder, inserting the spike, compacting the charge, and then aiming was a lengthy one. Even the most skilled European arquebusiers of the era could only manage a little over a minute to fire a single shot. The Mohicans had experienced conflict with Europeans before, so they had some familiarity with this European weapon. In fact, the Mohawk tribe also had 20 or 30 matchlocks acquired through trade with white people. However, after using them, the Mohawks found them inferior to their bows and arrows and abandoned them. This wasn't the era of the 18th century matchlock improvements. By the mid-18th century, more sophisticated, faster firing, and more convenient models had emerged to adapt to the times. Consequently, even the Indians adopted matchlocks. However, this was in 1620, and matchlocks were still considered very ancient. But Zhao Hongai changed all that. He actually invented the 5-shot method of warfare, a method that radically altered the course of history. Black Bear, if you were leading the Mohawk warriors against these Black Eyes warriors, could you defeat them? The old chief, Samura, had also received an invitation and had come to Manhattan Island to watch Zhao Hongai's tribal warriors in action. Afterward, Samura quietly asked Black Bear, who was following behind him. Black Bear thought for a moment and replied, a head-on battle would absolutely wipe us out. I simply can't reach them. That 5-shot burst is too powerful. Black Bear spoke truthfully, and Samura fell silent. It was unclear what he was thinking at the moment. However, if I were to fight them, I wouldn't engage them head-on. I'd use dense forests, swamps, brush, and ambushes to harass the enemy. I'd maximize our advantages and prevent them from exploiting the strengths of our muskets. Black Bear pondered this question himself. He knew there was no way he could fight such warriors head-on. He was suicidal, and Black Bear was no fool. However, while the musket tribe with its 5-shot burst mode was powerful, they were not without weaknesses. First, the musket was a long-range weapon. Once the enemy got close, it was useless. Therefore, to defeat such an enemy, you had to find a way to get close to them. But the enemy wasn't so easy to approach. So what was to be done? The world doesn't fear thinking, but fears not thinking. Black Bear could see that this 5-stage burst had a weakness. It required a well-organized formation to execute a 5-stage burst and execute it smoothly, but this completely exposed its weakness. If such a team encountered a sudden attack or an ambush, It would likely be impossible to form a complete formation in such a short time. This would give the attacker a perfect opportunity to defeat them. However, Black Bear didn't intend to be too specific, remaining vague. He did so because he didn't want Samra to know too much. Although they have weaknesses, they are still very powerful. I think we must get along better with Black Eyes to avoid conflict between us. Samra was already feeling a strong sense of crisis. Yes, when Zhao Hongai was weak, he didn't care about anything. Back then, Samra didn't think much, which was why Zhao Hongai easily acquired ownership of Manhattan Island. If Zhao Hongai had such a team at that time, Samra would never give Manhattan Island to him. But no one could have imagined that, in just a few months, Zhao Hongai had established a small tribe on Manhattan Island, east of the Mohican Islands. Although Zhao Hongai's tribe, including slaves, numbered less than 1,000, far smaller than the Mohicans' 10,000, it still shocked Samra. A tribe of less than 1,000, strictly speaking, wasn't small. Beyond the Akarach Mountains west of the Mohicans, small tribes of less than 1,000 people abounded along the route to the Great Plains. Even within the Mohican region, such small tribes existed. Zhao Hongai's tribe was particularly different from the others. His warriors were exceptionally skilled in combat, possessing a formidable mastery of the white man's weapons. Samra sensed that Zhao Hongai was no longer so weak. Even a powerful tribe like the Mohicans wouldn't stand a chance in a conflict with Zhao Hongai. It was with this in mind that Samra spoke to Black Bear. Aren't we getting along well with Haitong, and our trade cooperation is going smoothly? Why would the chief say that? After hearing Samra's words, Black Bear's heart sank. He thought to himself, Haitong was right. It seems his growing strength has made the chief feel threatened. It turned out that Zhao Hongai had told Black Bear about this matter before he planned to conduct the drill. He also analyzed the pros and cons of the drill, including the potential psychological changes that the drill might cause among the Mohawk leaders. Black Bear had originally disbelieved these things, but now he had to believe what Zhao Hongai had said to him. Samra had no idea what Black Bear was thinking. He gazed at the Manhattan Island guards, who were leaving under Song Hu's leadership, with a gleaming eye. He said to Black Bear, with the arrival of the tribe members, Black Eye's power has grown. This rapid growth has caused panic in some within the tribe, and even I'm a little afraid. After all, having such a powerful tribe around isn't always a good thing. Samra expressed what he and everyone else were thinking. Black Bear remained impassive, but inwardly he harbored a deep sense of disdain. Chief, regardless of Black Eye's power, he's our friend. The stronger he is, the better for us. If all else fails, we'll form an alliance. I don't think the tribesmen would object to such a powerful ally. Black Bear was now completely on Zhao Hongai's side, but he remained within the Mohican tribe, leveraging his status to accomplish certain things. If it weren't for this need, Black Bear would have left the Mohican tribe long ago and joined Zhao Hongai's smaller tribe. An alliance? That's certainly something we can consider, but we also need to take the elders' opinions into account. I'm just not sure if they're on board with it. Samra nodded slightly in response to Black Bear's reminder. At this moment, Wang Shan approached. Respected Chief Samra, our tribal leader, Haitong, sincerely invites you to have lunch with the Mohican elders. Not far away, some elderly and frail slaves who had remained on Manhattan Island had laid out thick animal fur mats on the ground and were constantly setting out the prepared food. Samra nodded and said, "Thank you very much." Chapter 60 The Other Side of the Sea. P.S. It's confirmed, my wife is pregnant. Laughs. It's been a busy time lately, with a birth permit application, checkups at the hospital, pregnancy classes, and so much more. As a husband, I have to be there every step of the way. Welcome everyone to Manhattan Island to watch our tribe's military exercises. I'm deeply grateful and have prepared a small amount of wine as a token of my appreciation. After everyone was seated, Zhao Hongai offered a few words of congratulation, and lunch began. The Mohawk elders took advantage of the lunch break to question Zhao Hongai. Haitong, can you provide the weapons you have to the Mohawk tribe? How did you come up with the idea of using a matchlock rifle in this way? Haitong, can this method be used to teach our Mohawk warriors? One question after another was peppered at Zhao Hongai, and the elders waited for his answer. Samra was also very curious about Zhao Hongai's response. He had met many white people and knew their attitude towards the Mohawk. While a small number of matchlocks could be sold to the Indians, too many would make the whites unwilling to trade. Samra could see that this was a form of self-preservation for the whites. Previously, samurai hadn't cared much for matchlocks. After all, while they looked powerful, they were actually useless weapons for the Indians. In practice, they were no more effective than bows and arrows or blowguns. Therefore, samurai hadn't thought much of the whites' reluctance to sell them large quantities of them. However, Zhao Hongayu's change in the way matchlocks were used in combat shocked samurai. If the whites also used matchlocks in this way to wage war, even the powerful Mohawks would be no match. As a result, the matchlock caught the attention of samurai and the elders. Purchasing matchlocks became a consensus among the Mohawk leaders. They also wanted to invite Haitong to teach the Mohawks how to use them. Samurai's concern was whether Haitong could actually sell them weapons and teach them how to fight with them. Whoever mastered this method of warfare wouldn't teach it to others. If the Mohicans had mastered it, they certainly wouldn't have passed it on, thought the old chief, Samurai. This was precisely why Samurai was so curious, wanting to know how Zhao Hongai would respond to these questions. We can sell you these weapons, no problem at all. As for the price, we'll just lower it by 10% to match the white man's price. After all, we're all acquaintances. Zhao Hongaiyu first addressed the question of whether or not to sell the matchlock rifles, giving everyone a satisfying answer. As expected, the fair and noble Haitong remained the same Haitong. He hadn't changed, and this was the most common reaction. Little did they know that the main reason Zhao Hongaiyu began selling these ancient weapons was because he had grown in strength and was no longer as weak as before. Furthermore, Zhao Hongaiyu wasn't worried that his warriors, trained in 21st century combat tactics, wouldn't be able to defeat these Indians. Even if they purchased matchlocks and learned to fire 5 bursts, Zhao Hongai was still confident he could defeat them. He controlled supplies like gunpowder and lead. Therefore, simply buying matchlocks was useless. Without gunpowder and lead, they were just a pile of firewood. As long as he controlled the sale of gunpowder and lead, Zhao Hongaiyu had no concerns even if the Mohicans purchased matchlocks. Besides, the Mohicans wouldn't necessarily be hostile to him. As long as he didn't infringe on their fundamental interests, he wouldn't clash with them. Furthermore, after 2 months of joint trade, the Mohicans' lives had undergone significant changes. Both their material and spiritual well-being had improved significantly. Their food had become more refined, and their living quarters more spacious. They used to worry about food, but now they didn't have to worry about it at all. If you asked a Mohican today if they still wanted to live like they did before, the answer would be a resounding no. It was a very simple truth. The primary reason for this change was Zhao Hongaiyu, and the goods he provided. If the Mohican tribe clashed with Zhao Hongaiyu, the first to suffer would be the Mohicans. They couldn't produce those goods. They couldn't grow rice, brew or guo tao, or make matches. They couldn't even grow cotton, sew cotton-padded clothes, or forge iron weapons. In other words, if they offended Zhao Hongaiyu or clashed with him, everything the Mohican tribe had would be gone. This was a matter that needed to be carefully considered. Zhao Hongai was fully aware of this, and it was the second main reason he could now confidently sell his matchlock rifles to the Mohicans. He didn't believe the Mohicans would abandon their current happy lives to clash with him. On a different note, even if they killed him, what would happen? His goods would eventually sell out, and without new supplies, they would be forced to return to their old ways within a year. Therefore, Zhao Hongaiyu, who controlled the source of goods, was completely safe. The Mohicans weren't idiots, they wouldn't do something so foolish. At the same time, Zhao Hongaiyu used this exercise to showcase his armed forces, warning everyone against any ill-intentioned actions. He wasn't a pushover. Weighing the pros and cons, even if anyone had ulterior motives, they had to give them up now. Zhao Hongaiyu's warriors had demonstrated formidable combat prowess. A conflict with him would yield no advantage, the cost would be too high. Ultimately, even if they defeated Zhao Hongaiyu, they would gain nothing. I'll teach you this method of warfare. I'll teach Black Bear, and he'll train the caravan guards and the mine guards. Zhao Hongaiyu even answered this question, completely reassuring the Mohican elders. Little did they know, Black Bear had already joined Zhao Hongaiyu and become his vassal. The young warriors selected from the Mohican armed forces under Black Bear's command were also radicals, representing the angry youth of the Mohican community. They held varying degrees of resentment towards the white people, and Black Bear was striving to gain control of both armed forces. It was precisely with this in mind that Zhao Hongaiyu spoke these words. Afterward, Zhao Hongaiyu gave Black Bear a subtle look, and Black Bear nodded in understanding. The exchange of glances between the two went unnoticed by the surrounding crowd. HMPH, they're just some old matchlock rifles. Even if I teach you how to fire 5 bursts, it won't matter. I control the gunpowder and lead, and you have to determine the proper amount of gunpowder. If you're not careful, it could be very troublesome. Zhao Hongyu chuckled inwardly. Yes, he could teach the Mohicans how to fire 5 bursts. But he wouldn't be so forthright about the proper amount of gunpowder. After all, a qualified musketry soldier needs more than just a quick increase in firing speed. Another crucial point to consider is the proper amount of gunpowder. European musketeers relied on their own experience to adjust the amount of gunpowder they added. No one provided systematic instruction on this matter, so it was something Zhao Hongyu could control. Too little gunpowder prevented the musket from firing. Too much, and the barrel could explode. This problem plagued musket commanders and soldiers across Europe. In battle, facing the onrushing enemy, musketeers needed to remain calm and composed. Without strong mental fortitude, fear and trembling could lead to trouble if they added too much or too little gunpowder. Furthermore, they needed to be fast. You couldn't take several minutes to reload gunpowder, that would ruin the daily. This problem wasn't solved until the advent of paper gunpowder. Each portion was carefully weighed and packaged according to strict standards, eliminating the problem of overfiling or underfilling. All you had to do was tear open the oil paper containing the gunpowder, pour the contents into the barrel, and then fill it with lead. It was the advent of paper gunpowder that boosted the musketeers' combat effectiveness. However, it would take decades for this device to become available. Meanwhile, matchlock muskets had also undergone significant improvements. The Mohawk elders were overjoyed with Zhao Hongyu's promise. These old men praised Zhao Hongyu profusely and began to pour Mohawk's magic potion into their mouths. How could Zhao Hongyu be fooled? It was simply impossible. May 15, 1621, sunny. We sailed across the vast ocean, toward New Hope. During this voyage, dozens perished from the harsh conditions and disease, but those who survived persevered. 46 days have passed, and we still haven't seen land. God bless us. On the Azure Sea, a 3-masted British galleon cut through the waves, heading westward. A man wearing a ragged linen shirt, brown trousers with holes in them, a beard and greasy stains all over his body. He was writing something on a notebook with an ink-soaked goose feather at the bow. Behind him, the crew members were doing what they were supposed to do. A young sailor with a red turban on his head climbed up to the observation tower on the main mast. Land. There is land ahead, a voice rang out, and immediately the lifeless ship became lively. Upon hearing this, the man who was writing something at the bow raised his right hand and made a cross on his chest. God bless. Chapter 61. Praise the Lord. Hurry up, boys. Land's just ahead. There's fresh water and food there. Hurry, the galleon's captain, the fierce-looking Leslie, shouted to the busy sailors around him. As if the sight of land had intensified, the previously listless sailors now seemed to burst with energy, as if they had endless energy. More people began to emerge from the cabin, men and women, all dressed in European attire. They crowded onto the deck, excitedly gazing at the distant land and shouting. Watching these excited and happy men and women, Captain Leslie's face grew a little more smiling. They'd been at sea for 46 days, and the men were exhausted. This wasn't the 21st century, with its luxurious cruise ships and all sorts of entertainment and amenities, leaving no room for boredom or loneliness. On a voyage in 1620, you had to battle loneliness and illness, constantly bracing for unpredictable weather and the dangers of the sea. During Leslie's voyage, 20 to 30 of his passengers died of scurvy. Clearly, ocean voyages in 1620 were not a happy occasion. The galleon steamed ahead at a speed of around 8 knots. Captain Leslie, using his telescope, observed the situation ahead. He spotted what appeared to be a strait with land extending out on either side, where land appeared ahead. As time passed, the galleon slowly approached. Go through this strait, and beyond these 2 stretches of land lies a larger landmass, Leslie commanded. The sailors, upon receiving the order, began pulling on ropes to turn the sails, slowly turning the ship. Captain Leslie didn't yet know that the strait he was passing through was the mouth of Manhattan Island at its southeastern tip. If he hadn't been intent on reaching the largest landmass beyond the strait, perhaps they wouldn't have encountered the events that followed. Unfortunately, there are so many knowing things earlier in this world. The galleon turned and steamed at full speed in the direction Leslie had commanded. Their target was none other than Manhattan Island, which had become Zhao Hongayu's private territory. Everyone, if there's no deviation, I believe this is the new world. Please all remember the treaty we signed on board and abide by it. I can assure you that as long as you adhere to the Mayflower Compact, we will be able to live a wonderful life in the new world. Unlike Captain Leslie and the busy sailors, the man who had been writing in his diary at the bow was now speaking to the men and women who had emerged from the cabin. As he spoke, the men and women's eyes flickered with longing for a happy future. All right, everyone, pack up and take inventory of our livestock and supplies. We will establish our new home here in the future. Following the man's instructions, the men and women dispersed. Captain Leslie, have you memorized this route? After the men and women finished counting their supplies, the man turned and walked to the bow, standing beside Captain Leslie, and asked. Upon hearing this, Captain Leslie lowered his telescope. He turned to look at the man standing behind him and said, "Don't worry, Father Matthew. I've recorded this route. However, we need to make some adjustments before we can return. Our next visit might not be until next year, as we still need to go to the Caribbean to purchase some goods. Of course, I hope you'll still be alive when I come next year, and have enough money to trade. I'm not a pushover, I hope you understand." This seemingly ordinary middle-aged man, dressed in a greasy and dirty white shirt and brown pants, was actually a priest. It's just unclear why he wasn't wearing the priest's black robe. God will bless us to overcome all difficulties. Taxes aren't that high here. As long as God's lambs work hard, I believe they can create a happy and prosperous life. I will also spread the glory of the Lord to the natives and build a magnificent church here. Father Matthew responded calmly to Captain Leslie. Captain Leslie simply smiled at Father Matthew's reaction. I hope so. I must tell you, the natives here are formidable. The Spanish in the Caribbean haven't yet completely conquered them. The Lord's servants also wield swords. We are not lambs to be slaughtered, Father Matthew replied with a slight bow. The two men conversed quietly as the galleon slowly approached Manhattan Island. But with Zhao Hongayu's wings constantly flapping, no one knew what the outcome of this deviation from history would be. The Mayflower, a ship etched in history, and the immigrants aboard, were unaware that their original history had been completely altered. Originally, they landed on a different island than Manhattan, and had received assistance from Native Americans to establish themselves in America. But this time, they were landing on Manhattan Island. Would the island's owners offer the same assistance to these European immigrants that the Native Americans had previously offered? Only God would know. History has been completely distorted. Song Hu stationed 3 genetics on a natural rocky cliff on Manhattan's southern coastline. Look, there's a ship. The Mayflower was now 3 or 4 nautical miles from Manhattan, quite close, since Manhattan had no harbor at the time, and the Mayflower didn't know where the deep waters were. They could only slow down and slowly explore. This gave the genetic station their precious time. One genetic quickly ran down the rocky cliff, determined to report their discovery to Song Hu as soon as possible. The remaining 2 genetic sentries remained, staring at the suddenly appearing ship. This ship is considered the most advanced of its time, but we still look down on it. When the leader develops steel warships, these wooden rubbish won't be enough. The 2 sentries, crouching on the cliff, staring at the Mayflower in the distance, chatted. A British galleon, displacing 300 to 700 tons, double-deck, with a poop, used as both a merchant ship and a warship. This type of ship is ubiquitous in Britain these days. It's considered the most popular seagoing vessel in the UK at the time. Another sentry responded. Hey, you have a better knowledge of history than I do. You even know this, his companion said, looking at him enviously. Ignoring the chatter of the 2 genetic sentries, the Mayflower had already stopped and lowered its anchor to secure the hull. It was now anchored 1 nautical mile from the coastline. Lower the boats, men, get your weapons ready. We're landing. Captain Leslie waved to the sailors and men armed with various weapons, then boarded a small boat. In this era, every ocean-going ship would have 2 or 3 small boats ready for long-distance landings. After all, sometimes they couldn't find deep water and worried about the ship hitting rocks. Therefore, they had to use small boats to reach any land they found and begin fighting or resting. These small boats were small, similar to the pleasure boats rented in modern parks. Captain Leslie took the lead, leading the sailors in the small boats toward the coastline. Since the coastline was not far away, Captain Leslie and his men reached land in about 20 minutes. After reaching land, the sailors quickly approached Captain Leslie, each drawing their weapons. The three musketeers and Leslie were surrounded in the middle, forming a small square. There were 21 people who followed Captain Leslie ashore, which was still too few. Therefore, the three small boats had to turn back and continue to transport the people on the boats, of course, all men. The women on the boats would only be taken on board when it was confirmed that there was no danger on the shore. This process took about 3 hours, and all the men on the boats were finally transported to the southern coast of Manhattan Island. These guys are quite cautious. They didn't rashly venture into the interior to explore, otherwise they'd be terrified to death if they saw our camp. The two sentries, crouching on the cliff, grinned at Leslie and his companions on the beach below, chatting to each other. Leslie and his companions, unaware that their movements had been thoroughly observed, ready. Forward, 233 men formed a small armed group, armed with crossed swords, cross axes, and spikes, some with bows and arrows. The group also included 15 musketeers. A galleon had a crew of 60 and could carry 350 passengers. It could be said that these 233 men were the maximum number of men they could muster. As Leslie and his companions crossed the beach, the vast grasslands and plains of Manhattan Island came into view. Everyone looked around in amazement, astounded by the fertility of the land. Some even knelt and kissed the ground. Father Matthew, a nail in hand, began to praise the Lord he worshipped. "Praise you, God, for granting this fertile land to your followers. God forbid, these people didn't realize that this land already had an owner. Whether or not it could be granted to them wasn't the Lord Father Matthew was talking about." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62: The Coming Collision. This is a divinely gifted land, seemingly even a lord's land. Our luck is incredible. It seems my fortune has turned. As the captain of the Mayflower, Leslie was also very excited. Yes, now European nations have their own tacitly agreed rules. In this era, once you discover a lord's land, it belongs to whoever discovers it. It also belongs to the country of the owner. If Leslie and his crew discover Manhattan Island, and if no other Europeans have discovered it, then the fertile plains in this area will belong to him and his crew. A visual inspection reveals that this plain is vast and the land is extremely fertile. It's absolutely prime farmland, as long as you have the ability to cultivate it. In Britain, prices are soaring, and people are struggling. Otherwise, they wouldn't have flocked to the New World in search of a living. In Britain, land is controlled by the great aristocracy, making it impossible for common people to own land. Now, Manhattan Island, seemingly a lord's land, appears before Leslie and his crew like a glittering golden treasure. "I wonder if this land is already inhabited," Leslie muttered softly, then sheathed his rapier. Hiding on the vast plains of Manhattan Island was impossible. After observing and finding no trace of the enemy, Leslie's anxiety subsided. Father Matthew, following Leslie closely, overheard his muttering. "Captain Leslie, according to current laws, as long as we can confirm that this land doesn't belong to another nation, it belongs to Her Majesty the Queen. Of course, as discoverers, we will become the owners of this land." Father Matthew's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. It wasn't that he coveted land or wealth, but rather that he needed the land to build a church. After all, owning his own plot of land would save him a lot of trouble in building a church. And if he could find more land to grow crops, the church's funding would be a breeze. "I hope so. Perhaps I can even become a noble," Leslie said to Father Matthew with a smile. Yes, Captain Leslie wasn't delusional. If Manhattan Island didn't belong to anyone, then Captain Leslie, as the discoverer, could indeed be crowned by the Queen. Of course, if there were gold or silver mines nearby, Leslie would be even more favored. Regardless, expanding the Queen's territory was a worthy reward. The ship's clerk approached with a scroll of hardwood paper and asked Leslie to sign his name. Every ship was staffed with a clerk like this, a government-appointed officer. Their role was to record the ship's route and certify the discovery of new land. Now, this clerk was confirming the ownership of this land. After signing his name, Leslie said to the clerk, dressed in a dark suit, "It's a little early to sign now. What if someone has already discovered this land?" Yes, this was what worried Leslie the most. It's not a big deal. At worst, it'll just be scrapped. But Captain Leslie, don't worry. From what I know, No one seems to have discovered this land yet. That means you're the first to do so. Congratulations." The clerk placed his right hand on his abdomen and bowed slightly to Leslie. The clerk's words were highly credible, as they were required to memorize the names and ownership of islands discovered by various countries. There couldn't be any mistakes. Since the clerk dared to say so and produced a blank scroll for Leslie to sign, it proved that he was confident that this was a legitimate land. With the clerk's word, Leslie had no reason to worry. "Upon your return, the Queen will surely reward you for your service to the nation. I congratulate you. This is fertile land. Once cultivated, it will become a beautiful farmland." The reason Leslie had to sign was because he held the highest position among the group. It was difficult for the clerk to ask the poor to sign. "I hope there aren't any natives here, otherwise it'll be really troublesome." Leslie raised his hand and stroked his beard. After confirming there was no danger, Leslie immediately ordered some of his men to take the women aboard. With that, the new immigrants aboard the Mayflower, and the future pioneers of America, had truly landed on Manhattan soil. "Charles!" Captain Leslie shouted, and a young man in leather armor, carrying a long spear, ran over. "Captain Leslie, what are your orders?" The young man, Charles, beamed with excitement and happiness. Captain Leslie glanced at him and understood. After all, even though Leslie had signed over this vast expanse of land, these people still had to share some of it. It was a shared discovery, and he couldn't keep it all to himself. At most, upon returning to England, the Queen would grant him a mandate to manage the land. And these crew members had suddenly gone from being producers to owners of a vast expanse of land. How could they not be happy and excited? The land here is at least several 100,000 acres, perhaps even more. Dividing it up this way would allow everyone to claim a significant share, becoming a landowner. It could be said that their status had begun to change. Even if they didn't want the land here and had no desire to return, they could simply sell it back in England, pocketing the golden coins and living a life of luxury for a few days. "Tell the Mayflower crew to be on alert. We are about to explore the surrounding area to confirm the presence of other people. Of course, our primary goal is to check for any indigenous people." Leslie couldn't be like the crew and the Mayflower's passengers. He had to maintain a clear mind and immediately execute the next step to eliminate any potential danger. Charles responded, then ran to the gathered crew and shouted, "Everyone, gather yourselves. We're going to explore this area. Everyone, get your weapons ready." At Charles's call, the Mayflower crew members stood up straight. The immigrants who arrived aboard the Mayflower, however, were busy and didn't join in. They were just civilians, with no interest in exploring the surrounding area. Besides, they knew full well that so-called exploration meant finding the natives, slaughtering them, and robbing them of their gold and supplies. The Mayflower's settlers had no interest in such an endeavor, and Leslie wouldn't let them participate. Otherwise, why would Leslie have instructed Charles to only recruit the Mayflower's crew? Logically, more men would have been needed at this time, so civilians with some fighting ability and weapons could have been recruited. But why didn't Leslie do this? The reason was simple: Leslie didn't believe the natives were anything to be feared. Although Leslie's crew currently consisted of only a little over 40 men, with their sophisticated weapons, armor, and training, he didn't believe they couldn't defeat a few of the natives. After all, even the Spanish, whom they considered weak, had conquered the Inca Empire with only a few hundred men. Was Leslie even inferior to the Spanish? Furthermore, with the British now victorious over the Spanish, their confidence was at its peak. The crew's eyes lit up when they heard Captain Leslie's words, conveyed by Charles. Because they knew exactly what they were going to do next. Explore the surrounding area and locate the indigenous tribes. If the natives were strong, then even the Mayflower crew would be in trouble, but if they were weak, then it would be their turn to make a fortune. In this mindset, anyone willing to join the fleet or go sailing was a poor soul. They dreamed of getting rich, and no one cared how or by what means. Quickly, the Mayflower crew formed into an orderly formation. Those carrying lances led the way, followed by warriors wielding cross swords, cross axes, and spikes, and at the back were 13 musket soldiers. Captain Leslie carried a European rapier on his left side and a Persian scimitar on his right. The clerk did not follow, as he would not participate in such an endeavor. However, Father Matthew volunteered to join Captain Leslie's crew, explaining that he needed to meet the natives and spread their glory. Leslie had no choice but to let him join. But as to whether things were truly as Father Matthew had said, only Father Matthew himself could know. Priests, even in this day and age, were not they exceedingly greedy for money? Gathering his troops, Leslie gave the order and they marched north in a mighty procession. Meanwhile, the sentry who had brought the news informed Song Hu of his findings, who in turn informed Zhao Hongyu. What? A ship has arrived from the south coast, and quite a few Europeans have landed. Zhao Hongyu's face darkened after hearing Song Hu's report. Elder Samura and his men had already left Manhattan Island. Zhao Hongyu had just rested for a moment when Song Hu hurried over with this news, which was unclear whether it was good or bad. Could it be that these were new European immigrants who had chosen a new location instead of the Virginia colony? Or perhaps my assassination of Baker had been exposed? Zhao Hongyu considered many possible explanations, but ultimately rejected them all. Who cares? This territory is mine, and whoever comes must obey my orders. I command. Assemble the Manhattan Guard. Chapter 63 Departure. Because the incident happened so suddenly, Zhao Hongyu hadn't anticipated the arrival of Europeans from the sea on Manhattan Island at this time. With the vast coastline of the eastern coast of the American continent, the chances of such an arrival were extremely low. Zhao Hongyu could only speculate that it was simply due to his own luck. According to the sentry's report and Song Hu's retelling, the number of Europeans who had landed on the southern tip of Manhattan Island exceeded 200 or 300. All of them were heavily armed, which made Zhao Hongyu take it lightly. Without giving it much thought, Zhao Hongyu immediately ordered the assembly. He needed to demonstrate force to intimidate the Europeans who had landed in Manhattan. Let them know who owned Manhattan. In other words, he needed to assert his sovereignty and show them that he was not to be trifled with. Although he hadn't yet clashed with the Europeans, that didn't mean they wouldn't. Zhao Hongyu was well aware of the character of the Europeans of this era. Regardless of their true nature, Zhao Hongyu had to nip any signs of danger in the bud. He wouldn't be like the Indians of history, offering aid to the white people when they were starving, only to turn around and die tragically at their hands. He wouldn't be that foolish. Now that the enemy hadn't established themselves, it was a perfect opportunity to deal with them, and Zhao Hongyu wouldn't let it slip. If they gained a foothold in Manhattan, dealing with them later would be extremely difficult. Song Hu responded and ran off to gather his warriors. After Song Hu left, Wang Shan approached Zhao Hongyu and asked in confusion, "Chief, we haven't had any conflict with those Europeans, and we have no hatred. Is it really okay to attack them now?" Wang Shan was puzzled and confused. First, these Europeans had only just landed on Manhattan Island and had no prior conflict with Zhao Hongyu and his men. Second, they had no idea Manhattan Island was Zhao Hongyu's private territory. It could be argued that this was all a misunderstanding. And why, in such a situation, did his leader seem so nervous upon hearing about the arrival of Europeans? At the same time, he immediately began to gather his soldiers, apparently planning an attack against the Europeans. Wang Shan felt that this was unreasonable, as if the army was acting out of prestige without any real benefit. Seeing Wang Shan's puzzled expression, Zhao Hongyu looked at him seriously and said, "Don't you find it strange that you would treat Europeans we haven't even met this way?" Wang Shan nodded. "Yes, Chief. I'm very puzzled. Why? We have no grudge against them, so there's absolutely no need to start a war." Zhao Hongyu shook his head. "They entered my territory, that's one thing. Secondly, do you think they're good people? Europeans of that era wouldn't be as kind to the natives as you are." He then gave Wang Shan a quick historical refresher. "I'm certain that if we didn't have the armed forces we have today, these Europeans would absolutely massacre us and plunder our property, just as the Spanish did in Central America." Wang Shan fell silent. Zhao Hongyu continued, "And we're short of slaves, too. These people are a valuable labor force. Defeating and capturing them would be of great benefit to us. Since they can enslave Indians or black people, why can't I do the same?" Zhao Hongyu, reflecting on the historical actions of Europeans, no longer felt guilty about his actions. "Wang Shan, most importantly, I want their ship," Zhao Hongyu said, expressing his truest thoughts. "A ship?" Wang Shan looked up at his leader. "The sentries said these Europeans arrived by ship. This means they have a ship capable of long-distance travel. If we could own it, it would be incredibly useful." Zhao Hongyu's eyes sparkled with excitement as he spoke. Yes, Zhao Hongyu desperately wanted that ship. For no other reason than the numerous benefits it would bring. With it, Zhao Hongyu could use it to trade with the Spanish or Dutch in Central America. He could also go to Europe and experience the customs and practices of that era. He could even board this ship and return to the China of this era, the Ming Dynasty. Of course, trading with the Spanish and Dutch was fine, and exploring the European continent was also acceptable. But going to the Ming Dynasty was far from feasible. Not to mention the long hours at sea. What could Zhao Hongai do upon his return? Even if things weren't going well in the Americas, he'd still achieved some success. It sounded like he was a local tyrant in America, rather than going back to kowtow to those masters. Besides, there was always the chance to return after he became successful. So the young master's goal was the other party's ocean-going vessel. Wang Shan finally understood his leader's true intentions. He felt no concern about robbing the Europeans. He was concerned his leader would do something that didn't benefit him. So, waging war was fine, as long as it benefited the group. Yes. That ship is a real gem. With it, we can trade with the Europeans in Central America. Those guys have ruled Central America for over 100 years, plundered a lot of valuables, and are incredibly wealthy. We can just make some gold and silver from them. Zhao Hongaiyu smiled at Wang Shan's words. Now you understand, don't you? If we seize that ship, all the Spanish and Dutch gold will be ours. Even if we don't trade, we can still become pirates. Zhao Hongaiyu's smile was sinister. Captain, you're truly sinister, but I truly love this kind of personality. Yes, you're absolutely right. We don't need to be so polite to those Europeans. We're still short of slaves. Wang Shan joined Zhao Hongaiyu in a sinister laugh. Let's go. Song Hu has already gathered the warriors. Zhao Hongai waved his hand and led Wang Shan out of the tent. When the two of them left, the genetic warriors were already lined up in an orderly formation. Looking at those young faces, Zhao Hongaiyu suddenly felt a surge of confidence. This was my team, my own private army. This was something unimaginable in the 21st century. Attention, Song Hu shouted as Zhao Hongaiyu and Wang Shan approached. Snap! The entire team responded in unison, each standing straight, chests puffed and heads held high. On the other side of the line, Zhao Hongaiyu's 12 stolid guards stood with cold, rigid expressions. Zhao Hongaiyu's gaze swept over their faces, noticing a hint of something unusual. Across from them, on the faces of the men and women of Song Hu's Manhattan Island Guard, Zhao Hongaiyu saw expressions of fear and unease, which gave him a heartbeat. Unlike these men, the 12 stolid genetics remained their same unsympathetic demeanor, unchanged. How could they react with fear? This was completely unnatural. Zhao Hongaiyu was deeply puzzled. But now wasn't the time to dwell on this question. Zhao Hongaiyu suppressed his doubts, raised his hand, and beckoned Song Hu over, saying, choose 100 male warriors, and the remaining 50 will defend our camp. The 50 Indian warriors sent by Black Bear were supervising the slaves felling trees, not on Manhattan Island. Another 50 genetics were at the Mohican camp, trading with Zhang Tai. The entire fighting force on Manhattan Island consisted of Zhao Hongaiyu's 12 taciturn genetics and Song Hu's 150 genetic warriors. Dozens of these 150 warriors were women. During a period of training, Song Hu had raised a concern with Zhao Hongaiyu. Female soldiers were significantly inferior to males in both training and combat skills. Therefore, Song Hu had reason to suspect that female genetics soldiers would be a liability in the event of war. It was precisely because of Song Hu's report that Zhao Hongaiyu decided to retain all the female soldiers. In his plan, all female soldiers would serve as political commissars from now on. Song Hu quickly selected 100 male genie warriors. The remaining warriors, following Song Hu's orders, hid in the fortifications on one side of the camp. With 12 dull-witted individuals and 100 intelligent genie humans, Zhao Hongaiyu, Wang Shan, and Song Hu, led by a sentry, marched in a mighty procession towards Leslie's landing site. According to the sentry's observations, the enemy has over 300 men. Can we defeat them with just over 100? Zhao Hongaiyu turned to Song Hu as they marched. Song Hu replied, if we can't even defeat these unsophisticated folks, then I think those who have received a 21st century education should be damned. It was clear that Song Hu held the Europeans of this era in contempt. It wasn't surprising that he felt this way. After all, the genie humans were primarily educated in the 21st century. Even someone like Song Hu and Wang Shan, with only a junior high school diploma, would have been considered a highly educated person in 1620. Song Hu, why do I feel like these soldiers are a little scared? After seeing the expressions of anxiety and fear on the faces of those intelligent genetic people again, Zhao Hongaiyu asked Song Hu in a low voice. Chapter 64 Countrymen vs. Aboriginal. Are you talking about these little guys who've never seen blood? Song Hu turned to look at the soldiers lined up in 2 rows behind him. Yes, I'm talking about them. Zhao Hongyu nodded. I think they're different from you, Wang Shan, and Zhang Tai. You're not too timid, but they aren't. Zhao Hongyu frowned. I'm worried if a real fight breaks out later. I wonder if they'll be able to hold their own. So, Zhao Hongyu was worried about this. After hearing Zhao Hongyu's words, Song Hu responded, I've noticed this too. During my time training them, I found these guys are quite good at training and are very disciplined. But they're still little guys who've never seen blood, and the best of them only had military training in high school. They're different from me, Wang Shan, and Zhang Tai. Song Hu's words suddenly reminded Zhao Hongyu that the 200 genetically modified people he'd bred were indeed like this. They were completely different from Wang Shan, Song Hu, and Zhang Tai. None of the genetically modified people he'd bred in those 2 months had served 3 years of conscripted service. But haven't you noticed? The ones with the best mindsets are these 12 blockheads I've brought in. Zhao Hongyu raised his hand, gesturing at the 12 geneticists, who still wore stern expressions. Well, they're excellent warriors. They follow orders without hesitation and don't hesitate to risk their own lives. They'd be elite soldiers in the army. Song Hu was quite impressed by the 12 dull-witted fellows. It's a pity they just don't have the brains. They were only good for charging into battle and engaging in hand-to-hand combat. If they had a bit more brains, they'd definitely be better than the 150 little guys I have. Song Hu kept calling the newly trained geneticists little ones, but he didn't consider how old he was. Wang Shan, who was also overhearing their conversation, interrupted, I've seen Song Hu train these guys. They might be a little delicate, but they're much better than the city kids. It had to be said that Wang Shan was speaking the truth. The geneticists Zhao Hongyu had chosen were all from rural villages. Therefore, compared to the pampered children of the big city, these genetically modified individuals were truly far stronger. Although they sometimes complained about Song Hu's arduous training, they all persevered, and not a single one backed down. Even the girls were like this. This was no different from the reality of young people in the 21st century. Although this still left Song Hu unsatisfied, he was still not entirely satisfied. It's natural to be afraid. They're still children. They've never been soldiers before, so they have all the emotions. Just understand, Song Hu shook his head helplessly. Regardless, despite the uneasiness and fear on the faces of these soldiers, they still obeyed orders. The fact that no one deserted was already a blessing. These 12 young men are really good. They're the ones who truly deserve to be captains, Zhao Hongyu said to Wang Shan and Song Hu with a wry smile. I used to be a little disdainful of their low intelligence, but now it seems that being dull has its advantages, and being cunning has its disadvantages. Zhao Hongyu's words were also due to his concerns. Because they possess intelligence, they also possess all the emotions of a normal person. So, in this state of anxiety and fear, how much combat effectiveness can these 100 young soldiers exert? It might even affect the effectiveness of the 5-stage burst. This is what Zhao Hongyu is most worried about, and what he fears most. But what's the point of worrying? He can't control it. Now it seems that I have to be selective when breeding genetic humans in the future. Having intelligence isn't always a good thing, don't you two agree? Zhao Hongyu raised his hand and touched his chin. Wang Shan didn't answer the question, but Song Hu nodded repeatedly. Chief, you're right. I need soldiers under my command, the kind who can faithfully carry out their superiors' orders. So what if they have intelligence? It doesn't necessarily make them excellent soldiers. It was obvious that Song Hu was very dissatisfied with his current men. Zhao Hongyu nodded as he listened. From now on, all of these guys with normal intelligence can be made political commissars. Soldiers can all be filled with adult genetics. That's much easier, Wang Shan interjected. Wang Shan and Song Hu exchanged words, and many things Zhao Hongyu had struggled with were now completely puzzling. What are soldiers? Soldiers are killing machines. They don't need to think for themselves. They simply need to faithfully execute their superiors' orders, leaving other issues to their superiors. Furthermore, wars in this era aren't that complex. It's a battle of individual courage and the most fearless. Clearly, the dull genetics are more fearless and can execute orders perfectly. Give them an order, and they'll carry it out, even if it means death. This makes them superior to intelligent genetics. Because of intelligence, they become more thoughtful. Often, when faced with a situation, They start weighing the pros and cons. This is a very bad thing. Especially when they become afraid of death, it's even worse. Zhao Hongyu couldn't have imagined that, having thought everything was going well, so many problems would suddenly be exposed. I hope we can make it this time. He shook his head helplessly, sighing before speaking to Song Hu and Wang Shan. Captain, don't be so helpless. They may not be the most perfect soldiers, but they can still defeat those 200 or 300 Europeans, Song Hu reassured Zhao Hongyu. Come on. Everyone, trot. Stop looking so lifeless, okay? After addressing Zhao Hongyu, Song Hu waved his hand and shouted to the long line of soldiers behind him. The soldiers broke into a rhythmic and orderly trot. After about a mile, a figure loomed ahead. Enemy sighted ahead, form up. Seeing the faint silhouette on the horizon, Song Hu turned and quickly gave the order to form up. Following Song Hu's command, the 100 genetic warriors quickly divided into 4 small squares, each divided into 5 rows of 5 soldiers. March! Bang! 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 The soldiers formed up and began to slowly advance. Song Hu left Zhao Hongyu's side to direct his troops. Go, send someone to scout and see how many locals there are on the other side, Zhao Hongyu ordered without turning back. Wang Shan, standing behind Zhao Hongyu, immediately turned around and pointed at one of the 12 taciturn gene humans. You, go and scout the enemy's numbers. Avoid contact and return quickly, the gene human said. Yes, sir, and sprinted off. Since Zhao Hongyu had no horse, their primary means of transportation was walking. Watching the gene human scurrying off, Zhao Hongyu licked his dry lips. I wonder when the space-time exchange will allow the trading of animals like horses, pigs, and cows. If they did, it would be a huge help to me. About 15 minutes later, the gene human in charge of scouting returned to the group. Captain, the enemy number no more than 60. They have over a dozen spears, over 20 various short weapons, and a dozen muskets. Is that just a handful of people? Zhao Hongyu wondered after listening to the gene man's report. How could there be so few? Could they be the vanguard? I remember the sentry reported that 200 or 300 Europeans had landed on Manhattan Island. Zhao Hongyu was deeply puzzled. It looks like they're the vanguard. Their small number is just right. We can completely wipe them out and weaken their effective strength. Wang Shan leaned over and said to Zhao Hongyu grimly. Zhao Hongyu nodded. Picking the weak ones. Okay, I like that. A smaller force meant an easier defeat, and Zhao Hongyu was happy to engage such an enemy. He also wanted to see how effective these gene men were after so much training. A fight was the only way to tell if they were any good. Estimating the distance, he estimated that they were still several hundred meters away from contact with the enemy. At this time, the enemy on the other side had also discovered them and was quickly forming a square formation. Let those country bumpkins see how powerful we are. We can't do this without fighting them, Zhao Hongyu said to Wang Shan with a wicked smile. Wang Shan, the lackey, nodded repeatedly, indicating his complete agreement. After all, in their eyes, Europeans are all country bumpkins, and there's no doubt about that. An unidentified group appeared ahead. Form a formation, defend. When Zhao Hongyu spotted Leslie and his group also spotted Zhao Hongyu and his group. After a quick visual assessment, Leslie easily saw that the enemy had a clear numerical advantage. It was precisely for this reason that Leslie and his group suddenly became nervous. They immediately formed a defensive formation, imitating the Spanish square formation. Who are these people ahead? Natives? Spanish? Dutch? Or French? At this moment, Leslie's mind was filled with questions. Don't panic. Musketeers, and gunpowder. Spearmen are on the periphery. Hold the second-level position with short weapons, follow the people around you in parallel, watch him and walk together, don't mess around. Leslie shouted, gave a series of orders, and corrected some guys in the square. Soon, the two groups of people came closer. There was a tacit understanding between the upper and lower levels, and they all stopped the team 100 meters away. Leslie looked closely and saw a strange team appearing on the opposite side, wearing a strange outfit that he had never seen before. This outfit does not belong to any country in Europe, and these people have black pupils and black hair, and yellow skin. Obviously, these people are definitely not Europeans. It seems that we have encountered natives today. Father Matthew, who was a little nervous, whispered to Leslie. Just natives, Leslie, will make them never forget today, and my image will always appear in their nightmares. Chapter 65 Genetic people may not be useful. now only 150 meters apart. Zhao Honggai looked at Leslie and the others with disdain. And Leslie and the others, in turn, looked at Zhao Honggai and the others with disdain. Form a line. You bunch of idiots waiting to be fucked. Hurry up and get in position. The natives are about to attack. If you don't want to be ripped off, fight them with all your might. Leslie's lieutenant, brandishing his scimitar, shouted at the sailors with a ferocious, terrifying expression. Under his encouragement, the initially uneasy sailors gradually calmed down. Father Matthew, standing behind Captain Leslie, said, "Should we send someone to make contact? According to the rules, this is required before a battle." Father Matthew was right. Whenever two armies met on the European continent, the opposing sides would send or personally hold a high-level meeting, taking place on the battlefield. Only after a heated exchange of words could a decision be made on whether to commence the battle. Furthermore, even after a battle had begun, it could be stopped at any time for further negotiations. It must be said that wars on the European continent were quite bizarre. Such things rarely occurred on the Chinese mainland. Leslie stroked his greasy, wispy brown beard, then said to Matthew, "This isn't Europe. That won't work here. We have a better way to deal with the natives, exterminate them all and make their property our own." Leslie smirked wickedly at Matthew. Matthew, a servant of the master, heard Captain Leslie's words, but didn't refute them. Instead, he echoed them. Well, in this continent unenshrined by the Lord's glory, sometimes the sword is more powerful than words. The implication was clear. Father Matthew supported Captain Leslie. In this era, even priests held a sword in one hand and a Bible in the other, not unlike centuries before during the Crusades. The only difference was that the priests of 1620 weren't facing civilized people, but rather uncivilized natives. Amidst shouts, the sailors formed a neat square formation. The spearmen stood at the perimeter, their spears tilted slightly forward. The sailors, armed with short weapons, stood behind the spearmen, their faces stern as they advanced. The musketeers in the last row took advantage of this opportunity to load their gunpowder and lead, then inserted a long fuse. After completing this, the musketeers checked the mosquito coil-like device wrapped around their right wrists to light the fuse. Once everything was in order, they straightened their backs. To them, the sound of their muskets alone would send these unworldly natives fleeing. The Spanish were well versed in this. When battling the indigenous peoples of Central and South America, they often used the mere firing of their guns to scare the natives, making them believe it was a thunderbolt sent by the gods. This often resulted in victory without a fight, a truly bizarre victory. This story spread back to Europe and became well known. The Dutch, Portuguese, Irish, and French, among other nations that had ventured into the New World, also had similar stories circulating. Therefore, for a period of time, Europeans were quite credible about such stories. Leslie and his companions were among those who believed them deeply. Unfortunately, Leslie and his companions were unaware that the enemy they faced was not the indigenous people they had assumed. In fact, they were far more civilized and knowledgeable than the Europeans, were. The two central rows remained stationary. The left and right rows tilted at an angle, forming a crossfire formation. Meanwhile, Zhao Honggai's men were also arranging their troops. In terms of speed, their formation was much faster than Leslie's. However, the faces of these young geneticists, possessing normal intelligence and thinking, were perpetually shrouded in a cloud of unease, which made Zhao Honggai feel deeply uneasy. Fortunately, the 12 taciturn geneticists accompanying him didn't display such expressions, which at last made him feel a little more at ease. Like real humans, these young geneticists were quite nervous about stepping onto the battlefield and immediately engaging the enemy. This was perfectly normal, considering any modern person would feel the same way when faced with such a situation. Since geneticists were bred to resemble 21st century humans, they possessed both the strengths and weaknesses of 21st century humans. This was also the strangest aspect of the space-time trader. Wow, Song Hu, is he playing a game? I feel like the formation he's drawn up looks like the flying goose formation from some series. Watching Song Hu yelling and arranging his men, Wang Shan muttered to himself, smacking his lips. Although Wang Shan's mumbling was quiet, he was standing very close behind Zhao Honggai. Zhao Honggai heard Wang Shan's muttering clearly, and he focused his attention on the geneticist's formation. Zhao Honggai's eyelids fluttered at the first sight. Indeed, Wang Shan was right. The formation Song Hu had his men draw up was indeed somewhat similar to the goose formation. 100 geneticists were divided into 4 grids. Each grid consisted of 5 rows of 25 people. The 2 central grids, with the left and right grids projecting forward, each facing the enemy at a 140-degree angle. Once the 5-shot burst mode was activated, the enemy would face both frontal and flank attacks. Hey, Song-Hu, how did you come up with this formation? I think it's quite interesting. Not bad, Zhao Hongyu said, his lips curling up, a faint smile on his face. Although initially frustrating, he soon saw the advantages of this formation and praised it. Hearing his leader's agreement, Wang Shan, determined to be a loyal lackey, was sure to remain silent. Leader, how much do you estimate we'll lose in the upcoming battle? Wang Shan changed the subject. It's hard to say. Look at the expressions on those soldiers' faces, they're genuinely terrified. I'm worried this will have a huge impact on the battle later. Zhao Hongyu raised his chin and addressed the genetically engineered soldiers marching in formation at Song-Hu's command. Wang Shan observed the soldiers' reactions and, frankly, was deeply dissatisfied. They were so vigorous and impressive during training. But once they were on the battlefield, about to face the enemy, how could they become like this? Wang Shan felt a pang of regret. Zhao Hongyu saw Wang Shan's face shifting between emotions as he stood behind him, and he looked deeply distressed. Knowing he was feeling uneasy about this situation, Zhao Hongyu comforted him, don't overthink it. We have a significant advantage in numbers, and it's unlikely they'll defeat us. And think about it, they're flesh and blood people, young men, so it's not surprising they're reacting this way on their first battlefield. As he spoke, Zhao Hongyu pondered this question. He couldn't expect perfection from the genetically modified humans, that would be too much to ask. And even if they weren't genetically modified humans, even with hundreds of time travelers helping him, those from the 21st century were all combat elites with a natural instinct for killing. Imagine the bloodshed he'd participated in during his first 10 days in this era. Zhao Hongyu's reaction was even more horrified than those genetically modified humans. He'd seen throats slit, necks hacked, and blood and flesh flying everywhere, and he'd wet his pants in fear. Note, I don't know if this will cause another outcry, but imagine how you would react if you were faced with something like this. These genetic humans were bred to resemble ordinary 21st century humans, resulting in their ability to think and be intelligent. They've even learned 21st century knowledge, culture, moral standards, and legal concepts. Zhao Hongyu had already noticed some signs, and they weren't good. The performance of these genetic humans on the battlefield was a phenomenon. Load the gunpowder lead, check the lining, the fuse, and light the incense. After the soldiers formed up, Song-Hu gave the order, and they began to load the gunpowder in a chaotic manner, just as they had done in training. Unlike the methodical training, these genetic humans were now somewhat chaotic. This showed that training and actual combat were truly different. Even though these genetic humans had learned a great deal of knowledge and had a 21st century education, their mental fortitude was still lacking. But at this point, Zhao Hongyu had no other options but to pray that these genetic human soldiers would be of great use. Master, in my opinion, these genetic people can no longer serve as soldiers. If they really want to have their own armed forces, they have to be like the 12 guys around you. Wang Shan pointed at the 12 genetic people with cold, expressionless faces who only knew how to obey orders and said to Zhao Hongyu, Alice. Zhao Hongyu sighed inwardly and said to Wang Shan, let's solve this problem first. We can talk about this matter after we deal with these European idiots. Chapter 66, The British Who Bully the Weak and Fear the Strong. You idiot, why don't you put a liner before you load the lead? Wang Shan saw a young-looking genetic soldier, trembling with panic, loading a lead into the barrel. Unable to contain himself any longer, he walked over and gave him a hard kick in the butt. Hurry up and reload. You'll blow the barrel like this, you bastard. Wang Shan was so agitated for a reason. When loading a matchlock gun with lead, a layer of cotton-like material, called a liner, is placed at the bottom of the lead. This liner's main function is to seal the gap in the barrel, allowing the combustion of the black powder to generate enough momentum to force the lead out. Because the lead cannot completely fill the barrel, if the gap in the barrel is not sealed, there will not be enough momentum to force the lead out, let alone effectively hit the enemy. Furthermore, if the lead is too large, it may jam and cause the barrel to blow out, which is extremely dangerous. In 1620, matchlock technology wasn't yet fully developed, and using it was still extremely dangerous. This was one of the reasons why matchlocks didn't become mainstream, and cold weapons became the primary weapon of war. As someone with 21st century knowledge, how could Wang Shan not be aware of this? It was precisely for this reason that Wang Shan was so enraged when he saw the soldiers doing this. Take a deep breath. Banish fear from your mind. The enemy is right before you. Even if you're terrified, it's useless. Do you think they'll have mercy on you? That's a complete fantasy. They'll slit your throats with sharp blades, plunge their swords into your bodies, and take your young lives. Wang Shan walked to the front of the line and spoke loudly. So, now, you can only fight the enemy to ensure your survival. Fear and anxiety will not help you at all. Without any righteous words, Wang Shan simply stated the truth. Defeating the enemy is the way to go, but being defeated is the way to die. It's that simple, a very simple truth. However, after Wang Shan finished speaking, a large number of people finally understood the situation and managed to calm down, no longer appearing so panicked. This was a good sign, at least these soldiers had regained some courage. Wang Shan nodded silently. The young genetic soldier, who had just been kicked by Wang Shan, reloaded his gunpowder and lead, this time not forgetting the proper procedure, not forgetting to use the lining. After doing all this, Wang Shan drew his pistol and machete from his waist and waved them in the direction of Leslie and the others. Keep in formation, forward, bang, bang, bang. The troops began to advance in an orderly fashion, the dull clatter of footsteps echoing, orderly yet somewhat oppressive. The effective lethality of a matchlock musket is within a range of 20 meters. Beyond that, it is essentially useless. In the 21st century United States, some firearms enthusiasts conducted an experiment. At a distance of 10 meters, using a short pistol from the late 17th century to shoot at a target, almost all 10 shots missed. Such statistics are truly astonishing. Note, for those who don't believe this, check out the documentary channel, they occasionally show this kind of thing. This question is not fabricated by the author, so please don't criticize me. Meanwhile, Zhao Hongyu and his men were still using matchlock muskets from the early 17th century, which were inferior in both accuracy and craftsmanship to the improved muskets of the late 17th century, decades later. Therefore, to improve accuracy, Song Hu had to get the troops within effective range. Of course, the 5-shot burst mode was also chosen to increase the rate of fire and compensate for accuracy. According to Song Hu's plan, since the accuracy wasn't good enough, he'd use the rain mode. He doubted that even with this high-speed firing mode, there wouldn't be any dead rats. In short, no matter which mode he used, hitting an enemy with an old-fashioned matchlock musket was essentially a matter of luck, a fact that remained true even during the Napoleonic era in France. It was already May, and the weather was getting hot. Zhao Hongyu and his men had already bid farewell to their labor insurance coats. Even the Mohawks had begun to go bare, wearing only a piece of cloth similar to a crotch-covered trouser around their genitals. Unfortunately, Zhao Hongyu and his companions couldn't do the same. Due to the limited availability of goods, he had to spend a fortune to have the Counterfeit Umbrella Research Institute sew a batch of green military shorts and vests from the 1960s and 1970s for his genetics. Fortunately, considering they were in 1620, the time trader had removed the words Liberation and August 1st from the vests, preventing any unforeseen incidents. Green knee-length military shorts, a green cotton military vest, and old-fashioned green military canvas shoes became Zhao Hongyu and his companions' attire, a 1970s-style outfit. To outsiders, this attire seemed a bit strange. Even Zhao Hongyu felt a bit nauseous. As the enemy column slowly advanced, Leslie's men grew more serious. Are the enemy's weapons clubs? Are they planning to fight us with such primitive weapons? God knows, these natives are truly pitiful. Father Matthew, due to his nearsightedness and double vision, didn't clearly see that Zhao Hongyu's men were using matchlock muskets. But their attire is truly bizarre. How can their pants be so short, and their shirts have no sleeves? Europeans didn't yet have such clothing, so they certainly didn't understand the concepts of shorts and vests. Therefore, Father Matthew naturally assumed that the natives' clothing had shrunk significantly because they lacked fabric. Furthermore, the fabric Zhao Hongyu and his men wore wasn't the mainstream European linen or Persian cotton. It was a fabric they had never seen before, and Father Matthew was deeply curious. Once we defeat these natives, I'll see what kind of material their clothes are made of. Unlike Father Matthew, whose nearsightedness and double vision made it difficult to see the situation ahead, Captain Leslie's eyes began to twitch rapidly. At the same time, His previously relaxed expression tightened, revealing his intense nervousness. Captain Leslie, picking up a brass monocular, carefully examined the enemy's equipment. His heart sank. Oh my God, these enemies aren't even natives, and their weapons aren't sticks, but arquebuses. Seeing clearly through the telescope, Leslie realized that everything he had previously believed was wrong. This wasn't the most terrifying thing. After all, it was well known that arquebuses lacked accuracy. So, no matter how many arquebuses the enemy had, Leslie wouldn't be afraid. The problem was, in addition to the arquebuses, the enemy also had sharp machetes at their waists and cross-axes on their thighs. They were armed to the teeth, completely unconcerned with ranged or close combat. Furthermore, the enemy outnumbered them by a factor of 2, putting Leslie and his men in a very vulnerable position. As Zhao Hongai's team slowly and orderly advanced, Leslie's expression grew increasingly grim and serious. The formation was perfectly organized, proving that this team was well trained and definitely not a ragtag bunch. We must devise a countermeasure now, or they will face utter destruction. Captain Leslie quickly made a decision. Europeans are so realistic. If they think they can defeat you, they'll chase you down and never let you go. Even begging for mercy will be of no use. When the Spanish conquered the Inca in Central and South America, the Inca king surrendered and offered dozens of tons of gold. What happened? He was still scolded to death by the Spanish, who poured liquid gold down their throats. The main reason was that the Inca were too weak, and the Spanish thought they were easy to bully. If you possess a force comparable to the Spanish, just look at what the Spanish will do. The British, Dutch, Irish, French, and Portuguese all have the same mindset as the Spanish. They bully the weak and fear the strong. This is especially true when dealing with the indigenous peoples of the New World. If you're strong, they won't use harsh tactics against you, they might even try to win you over. If you're weak, then it's tough. Captain Leslie was a typical European. He had previously dismissed Zhao Hongaiu and his men as a motley crew of natives and hadn't taken them seriously. He believed they could be annihilated with their superior weaponry. Therefore, when Father Matthew asked him if he wanted to engage them, he flatly rejected the idea. The fundamental reason was that Leslie believed he was stronger than the natives and didn't need to engage the weak. But now, as he discovered everything was going against his expectations, the thought of engaging them arose in his mind, a truly amusing thought. Everyone, calm down. I'll see if we can negotiate. Judging from their formations and weapons, they must be a tribe with a high level of civilization, Leslie said to his lieutenant with a serious expression. His lieutenant, after taking a closer look at Zhao Hongaiu's equipment, had already given up on the idea of looting and burning. Most of Leslie's sailors shared the same sentiment. Since the enemy was so formidable, they also had the advantage in numbers. So why should this battle, which is a big loss, continue? Captain Leslie wants to talk to the other side now, which is what they are looking forward to. Although they had planned to do bad things before, the problem is that they didn't do it. Perhaps, some problems can be made progress without going to war. Leslie raised his hand to stop the sailors who were a little restless, and at the same time his mind was turning rapidly and thinking secretly. At the same time, he put his right hand into his arms and stroked it, and his heart was at ease. In a small bag in his arms, there were a dozen small glass balls he brought from England. If Zhao Hongaiu on the opposite side knew what Leslie was thinking now, he would definitely spit in his face and scold him for bullying the weak and fearing the strong. Chapter 67. Please keep smiling. Captain, what do you think these Europeans are doing? There are 2 of them coming towards us. Are they trying to engage the European idiots we're standing against? As a 21st century information-based educator trained by the time-space trader, Wang Shen also possessed some historical knowledge. That's why he said that. Furthermore, when the time-space trader was training them, these genetic individuals had watched some American blockbusters and historical documentaries, just like normal people. Zhao Hongaiu looked across and saw, as expected, a middle-aged bearded man wearing a European tricorn hat, brown leather boots, and a white linen shirt, and a man holding a Bible in his left hand and a rapier in his right. With a sneer, Zhao Hongaiu tilted his head slightly and said to Wang Shen, "These Europeans are hypocritical. I guess they've seen our military's impressive strength and realized there's no point in starting a war, so they're trying to see if they can gain something by avoiding it. Damn it, do you really think we're idiots?" It had to be said that Zhao Hongaiu's guess was spot on. "Chief, shall we go over there?" Wang Shen narrowed his eyes, clearly harboring no good feelings towards these Europeans. While not as angry as Song Hu, Wang Shan was a modern-day educated geneticist, having even served 3 years as a conscript. Therefore, deep down, Wang Shan held a deep disdain for these Europeans. A little contact is fine, let's see what they're up to, Zhao Hongyu agreed. He also wanted to see what they were up to. Although the Europeans had arrived so suddenly, leaving Zhao Hongyu unprepared, he wasn't worried about them causing any major trouble. After all, he had the upper hand. Tell Song Hu to be on guard, and attack immediately if anything seems amiss. You take 12 guards and come with me. That way, even if something unexpected happens, we won't be in danger. Wang Shan nodded, ran to Song Hu to relay the message, and then ran back. Leslie and Father Matthew reached the center line and paused. Father Matthew reinserted his rapier into its leather sheath, and Leslie placed his weapon at his waist. Zhao Hongyu and Wang Shan, accompanied by the 12 taciturn Jeans who served as his personal guards, slowly approached. Leslie raised his hand to remove his tricorn hat, drew a circle in the air, and placed it on his abdomen. He then bowed his head in a European-style salute. Father Matthew's lips moved, and it was unclear what he was muttering, though his voice was so low that Zhao Hongyu and the others couldn't hear. But Captain Leslie knew Father Matthew was praying to his Lord, asking him to send down a merciful light upon him, dispel his fear, and give him the courage to defeat the evil natives. I am Captain Leslie of the British Mayflower. I deeply regret having strayed into your territory. We mean no harm. Captain Leslie's words were translated by Father Matthew in Spanish, Dutch, and a halting Inca. In this era, shipboard chaplains typically served as interpreters on warships. Some also moonlighted as doctors while translating. There was no other way around it. In this era, besides the nobility, the only educated people were members of the church. Chief, that bastard was mumbling earlier. Was he cursing us? Father Matthew's quiet prayer had been overheard by Wang Shan. Since Wang Shan couldn't hear what Father Matthew was mumbling, he maliciously assumed he was cursing them. Consequently, his expression took on a somewhat unfriendly tone. Zhao Hongyu also didn't hear what he was saying, as Father Matthew's voice was too quiet. Therefore, he had no way of answering Wang Shan's question. When Captain Leslie spoke, Zhao Hongyu was immediately shocked. It wasn't because of Leslie's utterly worthless status as a captain, nor because he had come to greet him. It was mainly because he had heard Leslie utter the words Mayflower. For a time traveler, if he didn't even know about the Mayflower, he'd be a complete idiot. I remember my high school history teacher once taught this lesson and even mentioned the story of the Mayflower. So, the arrival of a little butterfly like me didn't change history much? Zhao Hongyu was shocked by the answer he received. Thanks to the language chi granted to him by the time trader, he was able to understand Leslie's words. Although the English of 1620 differed significantly from that of the 21st century in morphology and vocabulary, this presented no difficulty for Zhao Hongyu. Forget English, even any language spoken in this era would be no obstacle for Zhao Hongyu's language cheat. However, Zhao Hongyu remained silent, and Captain Leslie mistakenly assumed they didn't understand. So, Captain Leslie tilted his head and whispered to Father Matthew, "They don't understand Spanish, Dutch, or Inca. Try a few other languages." Captain Leslie's words nearly brought Father Matthew to tears. "Damn you, Leslie, how many languages do you think I know? It took me years to learn 3 of these. Do you think this is so easy to learn?" Father Matthew cursed in his heart when he heard this. However, at this moment, he couldn't really curse Leslie. He could only do this in his heart, but he had to keep a smile on his face to avoid misunderstandings from Zhao Hongyu and the others. Father Matthew racked his brains, thinking about what language he used to contact the other party. Logically speaking, when the Spaniards came into contact with the Incas, they learned the Inca language. Then there should be nothing wrong with using the Inca language, but why not? As he thought about it, fine beads of sweat oozed from Father Matthew's forehead. Wang Shan looked at Leslie and Father Matthew and shouted, "You bunch of bastards, you country bumpkins. Sooner or later, you'll be raped by the Indians. Damn you, you dare to enter our territory? You deserve to die." Wang Shan spoke in authentic Mandarin, and his righteous expression gave him a certain air of authority. Unfortunately, he was speaking incoherently. Leslie and Matthew didn't understand a single word he said. However, even though they didn't understand what Wang Shan was saying, it didn't stop them from guessing. So, after Wang Shan finished his long, rambling speech, Leslie and Matthew took in his expression. Seeing his stern face, Tinged with a hint of anger, they exchanged glances. "They're probably angry because we've entered their territory," Father Matthew whispered cautiously to Leslie. In Father Matthew's view, the natives were no different from animals. They all cared deeply about their territory. Captain Leslie's words were met with deep agreement. The two men's smiles instantly widened, their smiles utterly flattering. Those two old bitches can actually smile with such a flattering face. Fuck you two blind bitches, keep smiling for me. If you make me feel good, I won't let the Indians rip you apart. Wang Shan looked at Leslie and Father Matthew with amusement, unleashing a stream of curse words. The more Wang Shan spoke, the wider Leslie and Matthew's smiles grew, and the wider their smiles, the happier Wang Shan became, and the more obscene his insults became. The most surprising thing was that Leslie and Father Matthew, upon seeing Wang Shan smile, thought they had found a good way to communicate, and speculated that their kind smiles had touched the other party. With this thought, their smiles became even more flattering. Zhao Hongyu was deeply annoyed by Wang Shan's wicked humor. However, Wang Shan's scolding was quite satisfying, and Zhao Hongyu, who also enjoyed watching Captain Leslie and Father Matthew's servile expressions, didn't interrupt Wang Shan. After a long pause, Zhao Hongyu finally stopped Wang Shan. "That's enough. They can't understand what you're saying. What's the point of talking at cross purposes? Once we've made them our slaves, we'll have plenty of time to play with them later." A sly smile spread across Zhao Hongyu's face. Wang Shan chuckled, "Captain is right. Once they're all slaves, I'd be doing myself a disservice if I didn't play with them like crazy." Poor Leslie and Father Matthew, they didn't know at that moment that their fate had already been sealed. Just now, that old chrysanthemum said they had a ship called the Mayflower. Zhao Hongyu ignored Leslie and Matthew immediately and translated Captain Leslie's words to Wang Shan. Wang Shan had attended junior high school and completed 3 years of compulsory education. He'd also seen plenty of American blockbusters, so he knew what the Mayflower was. "Oh, the Mayflower." Wang Shan kept a smile on his face, occasionally glancing at Leslie and Matthew, not letting them see anything from his expression. "So, these people must be the ancestors of the Americans." Zhao Hongyu raised his right index finger and shook it. "It's not correct to say they're the ancestors of the Americans. After all, Americans are diverse, and there are already many Americans in the Americas. The Mayflower is so famous because these people created the Mayflower Jump, the precursor to the American Democracy Act. This treaty was widely accepted and gradually recognized by the future 13 American colonies." Zhao Hongyu knew much more about this history than Wang Shan. Zhao Hongyu and Wang Shan exchanged words. Leslie and Father Matthew resumed their self-righteous speculations. "Father Matthew, what are they whispering about over there?" Captain Leslie turned his head and asked Matthew quietly. Hearing this, Father Matthew looked at them seriously for a moment, then said to Leslie seriously, "Keep smiling. They may have sensed our kindness and are discussing how to contact us. Maybe because of the language barrier, they are also worried about this problem." Chapter 68. Damn it, you think I'm a fool. After a brief conversation with Wang Shan, Zhao Hongyu turned to Leslie and Matthew and spoke in a perfectly English accent. "This is Manhattan Island, territory of the Great Song Empire. And I, the Emperor of the Great Song Empire, can consider you invaders." Oh my goodness, this guy understands our language. Zhao Hongyu's authentic, aristocratic British accent startled Leslie and Matthew. However, Captain Leslie quickly regained his composure. Meanwhile, when Zhao Hongyu introduced himself as the Emperor of the Great Song Empire, his face showed no trace of shame or hesitation. It must be said that Zhao Hongyu no longer felt any pressure to lie. Practice makes perfect. He said this to intimidate these British people. In this era of Europe, aristocrats still held considerable power. He even exchanged a gift with Wang Shan for this purpose, and Wang Shan fully supported the idea. Wang Shan believed that raising a banner now was a good way to prepare for a rainy day. After all, they would eventually establish an empire, and Zhao Hongyu would undoubtedly become a true emperor. It was sufficient to establish a framework and establish a clear identity. Therefore, Zhao Hongyu first raised the banner of the Great Song Empire and assumed the title of emperor. Of course, this was also for future planning. After Zhao Hongyu had the means, he would cross the ocean to explore Chinese territory. Therefore, his status as emperor would undoubtedly be more prestigious than that of an ordinary person. At the very least, the officials of the Ming dynasty would be polite to him. And he wouldn't have to kowtow to everyone he met, saving him a lot of trouble. If all went well, this dream could be realized in less than 5 years. And in 5 years, the Ming dynasty would still be standing, undefeated by the whippers. Perhaps, he could even get to see what the whip slaves' ancestors were like, and see if they were truly as wise and powerful as portrayed in TV dramas. The moment Zhao Hongai announced his emperorship, Leslie's back bent even further. He was naturally filled with fear and envy of the nobility, and he fantasized about becoming a noble himself one day. Father Matthew's reaction was different, perhaps because he was a priest. He didn't harbor much fear of imperial power. This was because, at that time in Europe, the theory of the divine right of kings was prevalent. This meant that even if you were emperor, you couldn't claim to be the supreme ruler, only God was supreme. Without God's permission, your title as emperor was invalid. But how could God appear regularly on earth? Therefore, the Pope became God's spokesperson, able to crown emperors of various nations. Only an emperor crowned and recognized by the Pope was truly emperor. This theory was bizarre, but it also had considerable support. Note, not every emperor was accepted. Ambitious individuals existed in every era, and they often colluded with the church. The idea was that if the emperor obeyed the church, he could reign safely. If he disobeyed or acted against the church would support a new emperor to oppose him. It was precisely because of this situation that the future French Emperor Louis Xi always had a difficult relationship with the church. He became the first monarch to resort to force against the church and suppress it. Therefore, it's not surprising that Father Matthew wasn't very fond of Emperor Zhao Hongai. After all, European emperors didn't wield the vast power of life and death like the Chinese emperors. I'm deeply sorry for straying into your territory. Your Majesty understands our language, so I'm sure communication won't be a problem. Leslie breathed a sigh of relief. As long as they could communicate, there would be no problem. His biggest fear was a language barrier, as misunderstandings could lead to significant losses or even conflict. If they had the advantage, that wouldn't be a problem, but they were currently the weaker party. I don't want to hear your explanations. I want you to leave my territory immediately. Zhao Hongai raised his head slightly, glaring at the bowing Leslie. The arrogance, pride, and even the contempt in his gaze were all visible to Leslie. But Leslie didn't get angry. After all, Zhao Hongai was the emperor. This was a figure comparable to the Queen of England, and even he, a man without a noble title, couldn't help but admire her. Aren't all the British aristocrats like this? Each one was as proud as a rooster, looking down on everyone with disdain, save for encountering a noble greater than himself, when they would adopt a fawning expression, eager to offer a chrysanthemum. Therefore, Leslie took Zhao Hongai's attitude in stride. Your Majesty, we are out of fresh water and food on board and are forced to land to replenish these supplies. Furthermore, we have some immigrants aboard who are already homeless. Leslie bowed, looking up slightly as he answered Zhao Hongai. At the end of his words, Leslie reached into his arms. Slow down, be sure to do it slowly, and don't make any sudden movements. Wang Shan, his lackey, immediately thrust the pistol from his waist against Leslie's temple, grinning evilly at him. Wang Shan's action prompted 12 burly genetic guards to draw their pistols and aim them at Leslie and Matthew. Don't misunderstand, I mean no harm, Leslie shouted, feeling the coldness of the rifle barrels on his temples and breaking out in a cold sweat. Father Matthew, on the other hand, raised his hands, palms out, indicating he was unarmed. Your Majesty is of noble status, we must be cautious. Although Wang Shan didn't have Zhao Hongai's linguistic eloquence, as a junior high school graduate, he did understand some basic English. While the vocabulary and grammar differed slightly from the English of 1620, this didn't prevent Leslie from slowly grasping the meaning of Wang Shan's words. Slowly, Leslie's right hand, which had been tucked into his bosom, withdrew. In it, he held a small brown deerskin bag. Your Majesty, if possible, I would trade this jewelry for a piece of land in the south for our settlement. Leslie handed over the brown deerskin bag. Wang Shan took the bag from Leslie, tossing it in his hands and weighing it. Stepping back, Wang Shan handed the bag to Zhao Hongai. Chief, I weighed it, and it looks like some small beads inside. Although he couldn't see what was inside, Wang Shan had a feeling he had a good idea. Trading jewelry for land? Zhao Hongai took the bag with a grin and muttered, alright, I'd like to see what kind of jewelry this is, so I can see for myself. Wang Shan wasn't worried his chief would actually give the other party a piece of land. After all, the answer to such a question was obvious. They weren't true Native Americans, so the Europeans wouldn't stand a chance of getting any advantage in the land issue. Zhao Hongyu opened the bag and shook it downwards. A few glass beads tumbled out, piling into Zhao Hongyu's palm. Do you really think I'm an idiot? You're trying to fool me with those glass beads. Zhao Hongyu stared at the glass beads in his palm, his eyelids twitching even more violently. At the same time, the smile on his face seemed even brighter to Leslie and Matthew. There's hope. It seems the other party really likes these glass beads. Leslie chuckled inwardly. Wang Shen, who only understood Zhao Hongyu, saw the increasingly bright smile and prayed for these people to come. Maintaining a bright smile on his face, Zhao Hongyu said to Wang Shen in Chinese, "These British people think we are bumpkins. Historically, it was the Dutch who tricked us into coming to Manhattan Island using glass beads. Perhaps because of our appearance, history has deviated. Now the Dutch didn't come, but the British did." Zhao Hongyu didn't worry about Leslie and the others hearing his Chinese, as they couldn't understand it anyway. The Dutch deceived the Indians, but the British encountered us, Wang Shen said with a smile. Zhao Hongyu nodded. But whether it's the Dutch or the British, it seems they all think we're as easy to fool as the Indians. He returned the glass ball to the bag and tightened it, maintaining a bright smile as he looked at Leslie and nodded. Leslie's reaction led him to mistakenly believe that Zhao Hongyu was particularly fond of the glass ball. "Your Majesty, these jewels are extremely valuable, rare even in our country. I came across them by chance, intending to use them to purchase some land. Your Majesty seems to be very pleased with them, so I present them to you. I simply hope that your Majesty will agree to set aside an area for us to live in." As Leslie finished speaking, Father Matthew, standing beside him, suddenly added, "Residents can pay taxes and abide by your laws." Father Matthew's eyes flickered as he closed his mouth, watching Zhao Hongyu's reaction. In fact, Father Matthew had a purpose behind his words. Taxation and laws are the hallmarks of the nation's strength. Father Matthew still couldn't believe a barbaric civilization could emerge from such a barbaric land. If that were the case, the Spanish wouldn't have defeated the Incas of Central and South America. Perhaps the people before him had bought their matchlocks from other Europeans, absorbed some European cultural knowledge, and were now using it to deceive him. However, Zhao Hongyu's reaction surprised Matthew. He dropped the brown deerskin bag and turned away, showing no interest in continuing the conversation. Following Zhao Hongyu's departure, Wang Shen and his 12 genetically engineered guards followed closely behind. Returning to Song Hu's side, Zhao Hongyu said calmly, "You take me for an idiot, and I'll beat you into submission." Leslie watched the opposing troops approach, his expression changing several times, his lips trembling. But he immediately turned and ran back without further ado. "Form a line. Prepare to engage." After running for several steps, a shrill voice finally erupted from Captain Leslie's throat. Father Matthew only then reacted and hurriedly ran back. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69: The Rats Shit Among Genetic People. These guys are so rude. We were so polite, yet they're just going to start a fight without a word. Father Matthew, running back after Captain Leslie, complained breathlessly. Captain Leslie wasn't entirely sure what was going on. He could only helplessly tell Father Matthew, "I'm not sure why this happened, but I guess it has something to do with that bag of jewels I had." Captain Leslie truly regretted his greed, his willingness to use such worthless rags to defraud Zhao Hongyu of his land. Although he told Matthew it was just speculation, Leslie was almost certain this was the problem. But he couldn't speak out, he had to swallow the bitter pill. If he told the truth, his own sailors would surely eat him alive. Although he was the leader of this group, even leaders can be overthrown. Especially when he could lead them to their deaths. What would these guys do to survive? So, Captain Leslie had made up his mind. He would never admit, even to his death, that he had messed up. Hey, ho. By the time Leslie and Matthew returned to the center of the formation, the sailor knew a fight was inevitable. They shouted in unison, and the spearmen on the outer sides held their spears at an angle, making the entire formation look like a hedgehog. The Spanish dominated the European battlefields with their phalanx, a technique that required little technical skill and was quickly adopted by other European nations. The British were similarly adept at adopting the Spanish-inspired land warfare phalanx. Because Zhao Hongyu and his men were outnumbered, Leslie couldn't order his sailors to charge. That was something they could only do when they had a numerical advantage. All they had to do now was defend. Hold steady. Don't panic, those on the other side aren't that formidable. Pick up your swords and plunge them into their bodies. Victory's ours, we are the agents of death. Hey, ho, the sailors responded in unison, deep voices. Leslie drew the Persian scimitar slung across his waist. He had acquired it in exchange for 10 slaves from a Persian slave trader in Alexandria, Egypt, years earlier. The sharp blade gleamed with a cold light, and Leslie raised the scimitar high in his hand. Victory! May the merciful Lord grant us strength and courage to triumph over our fears and our enemies. I will use my longsword to reap the souls of the infidels, sending them to hell, while those who believe in the Lord will ascend to heaven. Amen. Father Matthew also drew his rapier again, knelt on one knee, resting the Bible against his forehead, and prayed. As Father Matthew stood straight, he placed the Bible into a leather shoulder bag. Then, with his left hand, he lifted a cross axe stuck in the ground. In an instant, he transformed from a clergyman into a fierce-looking warrior. The sailors also murmured to themselves, praying to their respective lords to bring them victory and protect their lives. Show these Brits some power. They actually treated me like a jerk and tricked me. This is truly intolerable. Zhao Hongai returned to his own formation, still fuming. Wang Shan consoled him, Captain, fight. They're outnumbered and no match for us. Turn them into our slaves, and then we can torture them any way we want. And don't forget they have a ship. If we don't defeat them, we won't be able to get that ship so easily. Zhao Hongai nodded. What else can we say? Let Song Hu beat these guys so hard that even their mothers won't recognize them. After Zhao Hongai agreed to the attack, Wang Shan immediately responded and turned to Song Hu, shouting, Command. Captain, you want to beat those Brits so hard that even their mothers won't recognize them. After receiving the order to attack, Song Hu grinned. Then, looking at the neatly lined up genie soldiers before him, their childish faces still tinged with a hint of fear, he shouted, Attack. Do as we've been trained to do, and crush those British bastards. Song Hu's words were certainly not pleasant to hear. However, after being chastened by his harsh words, the genie soldiers gradually calmed down. They were following the usual training procedures, cleaning the barrels, loading the gunpowder, placing the lead lining into the barrels, and then pounding it with a prodding stick. Then, they filled the cauldron with gunpowder, and fired. After firing, they cleaned the barrels again with a prodding stick, and repeated the cycle. Bang! 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 White smoke rose, enveloping the entire formation. The pungent, acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air between the two armies. Gunfire continued, and Song Hu kept yelling at the genie soldiers who had misstepped. Overall, there was no significant disarray or deviation in the formation. The 5-stage firing pattern gave the soldiers behind ample time to fully master the steps of loading and firing their muskets. However, since this was their first real encounter with real weapons, these genetic people, possessing normal intelligence and personalities, were still a little confused, but this was within acceptable limits. They made no unbearable mistakes or confusion, which was already quite impressive. Right. Right. That's right, you're doing great. Just get used to it. There's really no need to panic. Just treat it like hunting, and don't treat the enemy as human. That way, you won't feel burdened. Song Hu indoctrinated these young and naive genetic people with his unorthodox teachings, but it was undeniably effective. Most of the genetic people, under Song Hu's guidance, had already adapted to this level of combat. Song Hu memorized the reactions of only a small number of the genetic warriors, intending to eliminate them from the ranks upon his return. The geneticists Song Hu had memorized slumped on the ground, their faces pale. Some had glazed, unfocused eyes, while others stood there unable to move. To prevent these individuals from disrupting the orderly movement of the entire team, Song Hu ran over and dragged them one by one to the back, ignoring them. In Song Hu's view, these individuals were completely useless. He had originally considered executing them on the battlefield, but considering that these geneticists had been cultivated at great expense by Zhao Hongai, wouldn't executing them be a debt owed to the leader? So, Song Hu decided to leave it to Zhao Hongai to deal with, but this would have a negative consequence. These individuals would affect the morale of the other geneticists. Song Hu hated these troublemakers with a vengeance, wishing them dead immediately. What's wrong with those guys? Why did Song Hu drag them to the back? Zhao Hongai, observing the scene from a distance, asked Wang Shan with some confusion. Wang Shan took a quick look and roughly understood the problem. He responded, "They're probably frightened out of their wits on the battlefield. Song Hu must drag them all back, otherwise it will have a huge impact on the overall situation." After all, having served 3 years as a conscript, he understood the problem more quickly than Zhao Hongyu. Zhao Hongyu fell silent, thinking to himself, it seems that even genetically engineered humans have their flaws. Wang Shan stopped talking when he saw Zhao Hongyu's silence. The 5-shot burst mode looked impressive and truly intimidating. The puffs of white smoke rose continuously, making the genetically engineered team look like demons hidden behind the shroud. Unfortunately, looking intimidating is useless. You have to be able to hit the enemy. The matchlock's poor accuracy was revealed at this point. Bang! Bang! After 3 rounds of fire, not a scratch was made on Leslie's men. This shows just how poorly the matchlock's accuracy really was. At this point, the genetically engineered soldiers were still 50 meters away from Leslie. At that distance, hitting the enemy would require a lot of bad luck. Remember, even over 100 years later, during the Franco-American War and the American Revolutionary War, the linemen would still line up neatly and close and before opening fire. That's 20 meters. And over 100 years later. Think about it, musket technology 100 years later was much more advanced than it is today. Yet, back then, the linemen still had to close into an effective range of 20 meters to kill the enemy. Clearly, the development of muskets still had a long way to go. Today, Zhao Hongyu and his men have old-fashioned matchlock rifles that fire at a distance of 50 meters. At that distance, hitting the enemy was simply wishful thinking. Zhao Hongyu had already withdrawn his thoughts and focused on the battlefield. "Hold on! Hold on!" Captain Leslie shouted, encouraging the sailors to prevent the enemy's gunfire from demoralizing them. Although the matchlock guns were not very accurate, the constant sound of gunfire could effectively undermine the enemy's fighting spirit. Think about it, the matchlock guns on the opposite side were constantly firing. Although the accuracy was not high, no one could say that they would not be hit. Therefore, every gunshot from the opposite side was a real psychological torture for Leslie's side. Seeing that shooting from 50 meters away was useless, Song Hu gave the order to advance. Reload. Go 30 meters and attack in a loop. Chapter 70. They are rookies. Go ahead. Realizing that the attack was ineffective due to distance, Song Hu immediately ordered the troops to advance, moving them into effective firing range. There was nothing wrong with this approach, and Song Hu's order was correct. If this were a modern war, Song Hu and his men would surely be doomed. But this was the barbaric era of 1620. So Song Hu didn't have to worry about any unexpected situations. Bang! 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 The genetic soldiers marched in measured steps, forming a neat formation and slowly advancing. 30 meters wasn't far, only 60 steps would be enough. Although there were only 100 of them, the measured pace still made Leslie and his men feel the pressure. Everyone, hold steady. Don't panic. The arquebus isn't that formidable, you all know that. As the enemy slowly approached, Leslie sensed the sailors' anxiety. He quickly shouted comfort and encouragement to his men. This couldn't go on. At close range, the arquebus would pose a significant threat, and their passive defense was ill-advised. Leslie's mind raced, searching for a way to break this situation. "Captain, attack. Hopefully, we can break through their formation in one fell swoop. I see the enemy warriors are quite inexperienced, perhaps just fledglings on the battlefield." Father Matthew had a glimpse of a clue. Europeans of this era, especially those on the war-torn continent, had experienced countless battles. Even if they weren't professional soldiers, they understood warfare far better than Zhao Hongyu and his men. As the saying goes, even if they haven't eaten pork, they've seen pigs run. Hearing this, Leslie quickly glanced at the approaching troops. As Father Matthew had predicted, the warriors' faces were incredibly youthful, clearly not very old. Their expressions of nervousness and fear clearly showed. This clearly confirmed their inexperience. If they followed Father Matthew's advice and sent their men charging, perhaps they could actually break through the enemy lines and defeat them. You have to remember, his men were all desperate Europeans. Some were veterans of battle, finally tired of the cessation of war. When it came to combat, their experience far outweighed that of a bunch of rookies. Captain Leslie was confident of this. It seemed they could try Father Matthew's plan. Time was running out, and Leslie couldn't afford to dwell on it for too long. Father Matthew's suggestion, however, could quickly reverse their predicament. Guys, we're facing a bunch of rookies, a bunch of little daisies who've never seen a fight before. Captain Leslie tried to appear relaxed and natural, unconcerned about the enemy. Look. Those little guys are so scared they're practically pissing their pants. Some are even practically crying. Leslie brandished his scimitar, doing his best to tease the opposing genetic warriors. However, no one could say Leslie's teasing was wrong, as some of the genetic warriors did indeed perform poorly, much like Leslie described. Ugh. It's true. Look at that little guy, he's shaking so hard. Ha ha ha. Oh my god, what a bunch of sissies. Our enemies are just sissies, what's there to be afraid of? Kill them. I'm going to fuck their asses off. Leslie's words excited the sailors. They realized Captain Leslie was right. The enemy's genetically engineered soldiers were truly poorly performing. Since they were just a bunch of rookies, what was there to fear? Even though they outnumbered them twice as many. These seasoned sailors knew that a single charge would defeat such rookies. Haha, guys. What are we waiting for? Form a formation and march forward to take them down. No one can stop us from finding the golden treasure. That young man over there is the king of this land. Capture him and we'll be rich. Leslie finally revealed Zhao Hongai's fabricated identity, further fueling the sailors' excitement. Yes, Zhao Hongai was the king of this land. So, after capturing him, they could then demand a large ransom, a common tactic used on the European continent. At this moment, Zhao Hongai looked like a golden, fat pig in their eyes. Leslie's words completely ignited the sailors' morale. The enemy was weak, and the allure of wealth, combined, stirred them into a frenzy more than any other words could. In this era, risking life and limb on the ocean was all about acquiring more wealth and gold. A cowardly or fearful sailor wouldn't be a sailor. Not only did they have to battle the treacherous seas, but they also had to contend with unpredictable weather and pirates. Therefore, sailors who could sail in this era were essentially desperate and courageous individuals. Forward. Spearmen, concentrate. Stab them through the asshole. Leslie swung his scimitar forward. The phalanx began to press forward against Song Hu and his men, placing considerable psychological pressure on the genetically modified soldiers, who were experiencing combat for the first time. Halt. Line up. Start shooting. Seeing his opponent, instead of being overwhelmed, press forward head-on, Song Hu knew he was a formidable opponent. So, he decisively ordered them to halt and begin firing. The distance between the two sides had narrowed considerably, now only about 30 meters. At that distance, a mere run would be enough for close combat. Although the genetically modified warriors were equipped with cold weapons, Song Hu was skeptical of their combat effectiveness in close combat. These intelligent genetically modified humans were no different from modern high school graduates. In other words, you couldn't expect a group of recent high school graduates to engage in a bloody duel with a group of desperate criminals. It was simply unrealistic. Song Hu was well aware of his own disadvantages. He couldn't use his disadvantage to challenge the enemy's advantage, that would be courting death. He hoped to deplete some of their manpower before engaging in close combat. Song Hu silently prayed in his heart. Shoot. Bang. 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 As Song Hu gave the order, the young, inexperienced geneticist soldiers mechanically began firing their 5-shot rounds once again. White smoke rose again, obscuring their vision. Don't worry about the enemy's distance, you little brats. I just need you to repeat the drill and fire smoothly, Song Hu shouted at the top of his lungs, reminding the young geneticist soldiers to remember everything they'd learned in training, loading their muskets and firing smoothly. The situation isn't very optimistic right now. The enemy is pressing forward en masse. They might be going into hand-to-hand combat. Wang Shan, observing the battlefield from a distance, watched as Leslie and the others counterattacked, and he couldn't help but warn Zhao Hongaiu. Song Hu's geneticist soldiers aren't reacting well. It seems these geneticist soldiers have been completely defeated. Hopefully, they won't be overwhelmed by the enemy's charge. Wang Shan's assessment of the battlefield situation was now quite pessimistic. Although Zhao Hongai was skeptical, he had to consider it. Earlier, a frightened geneticist had collapsed to the ground not far from them, still unable to stand. Therefore, the situation Wang Shan had anticipated was not impossible. Get ready. As much as I hate to do this, I can't stand by and watch the fate of failure befall me. Zhao Hongai reluctantly reached out with his right hand, drew his machete, and with his left, drew his pistol from his waistband. then stepped forward to flank Leslie and the others. Zhao Hongyu shouldn't have personally faced such danger. After all, his safety depended on the entire group. However, if he didn't step forward at this moment, he didn't know if his courage would fade in the face of future danger. He was well aware of his inherent weaknesses. Once he'd experienced them once, he'd constantly make excuses for himself in similar situations. Slowly, all his courage would vanish, and he'd become a coward. In this era, danger was omnipresent. Therefore, he couldn't lose his courage. Besides, he didn't know what would happen if he ran away, or abandoned the geneticists. After all, Zhao Hongyu couldn't understand this hanged nature of the genetic people bred by the space-time traitor. He also worried that their loyalty might decline, leading to rebellion against him, which would be disastrous. While the Chinese genetic people were highly loyal to him, he couldn't help but be wary of this. Wang Shan followed closely behind Zhao Hongyu, a pistol in each hand, his face brimming with murderous intent. 12 of Zhao Hongyu's guards, expressionless and weapon-wielding, followed suit. In their eyes, even a vast army wouldn't frighten them, nor would they show the slightest hint of emotion. Not to mention, Leslie and his men numbered only 50 or 60. Hey ho! Hey ho! Song Hu and his men were enveloped in the smoke from the gunpowder musket fire, yet Leslie and his men pressed forward despite the barrage. 20 meters. 15 meters. 10 meters. 5 meters. As they advanced, only 4 or 5 unlucky souls, struck by lead due to sheer bad luck, were hit. The rest of them didn't even lose a hair. The unlucky few who were hit weren't injured in any vital areas. Most were hit in the abdomen or arms. They gritted their teeth to steady themselves and maintain their formation. It must be said that the European bumpkins of this era were still very powerful. Soon, the phalanx approached the area where the smoke was rising the most. Spearman, stab. Leslie, in the center of the phalanx, roared. And behind the thick smoke, tinged with a pungent smell of gunpowder, a cry erupted that Leslie and his companions couldn't understand. Drop your weapons and prepare to engage the enemy in close combat. Chapter 71. The situation is unfavorable. Abandon your weapons. Close combat. Puff. Puff. In a flash, more than a dozen spears burst forth from the still clear smoke. The characteristic dull thud of a sharp weapon piercing flesh echoed, and Song Hu immediately ordered close combat. Leslie's spear thrusts instantly knocked down 7 or 8 of the genetic soldiers, instantly rendering them ineffective, effectively crippling them for future combat. Losing 100 soldiers in such a short period of time was a terrifying feat. After receiving Song Hu's order, the genetic soldiers discarded their muskets and drew their cross axes from their thighs, hurling them into the smoke ahead. Then, they roared at the top of their lungs, charging forward with the machetes raised high. Song Hu gritted his teeth and blended in with the genetic soldiers. Some of Leslie's men were also struck by the muskets, but fortunately, the strikes missed their vital points and prevented them from being completely incapacitated. All the injured were spearmen on the periphery. The melee fighters, shielded by the spearmen, suffered no harm. Attack! Dozens of cross axes flew out of the smoke, tumbling and slashing at the spearmen in front. The spearmen were instantly chopped to the ground, some even left with several axe heads embedded in their flesh, a sight that made one's teeth ache. However, Leslie and his men couldn't care less about the spearmen's fate. In just 5 seconds, one after another, the genetic soldiers, machetes raised, rushed out from the lingering smoke, faces distorted and shouting. The cross axes had nearly completely neutralized Leslie's spearmen. The hedgehog-like formation's thorns had finally vanished, sparing the attacking genetic warriors from further damage. Clang-clang. The two sides clashed swiftly, and in a flash, the genetic warriors and Leslie's men were locked in a fierce battle. Bang! A sailor, wielding a rapier in each hand, dressed in a white linen shirt and a red turban, swiftly stabbed down 3 genets. He barely had time to manage a ferocious expression when Song Hu, suddenly appearing at his side, raised his hand to his temple and shot him. There was no splattering of brain matter, lead alone doesn't pack that much punch. The tiny lead merely punctured the man's temple, and he collapsed, twisting and turning. Dropping his pistol, Wang Shan raised his hand to block a scimitar strike. The melee was chaotic, with men falling with every breath. Puff. Puff. The dull sound of blood gushing out from a severed trachea was particularly eerie. Shouts and groans of pain filled the air. Technically, the genet soldiers were just high school graduates. Facing these British sailors, already highly skilled in combat, was a significant disadvantage. Initially, this was just an estimate, but as the two sides engaged, Song Hu discovered that his fears had been realized. By now, almost all those lying on the ground were genetically engineered soldiers. Leslie's side, on the other hand, had only suffered 4 or 5 unlucky souls. The chaotic battle involving so many soldiers didn't mean Leslie's sailors were inherently formidable. They too would be slashed by machetes and sustain various injuries. However, their continued fighting spirit despite being wounded was truly admirable. The genetically engineered soldiers, on the other hand, were different. Upon being wounded, they immediately screamed, their faces filled with intense fear. This would then spread to the surrounding genetically engineered soldiers, who would also be infected and hesitate to move forward. Consequently, they were subsequently dispatched one by the nearby sailors. Even a single cut on the leg or a single blow would send these genetically engineered soldiers reeling. Ouch! Ouch! The shouts of the British raged, making Song Hu so angry that he wanted to kill them all. Zhao Hongai also realized that the situation on the battlefield was not right, but now was not the time to think about it. He had to bring Wang Shen and the others in to reverse the unfavorable situation. If he didn't, he would be defeated by the British and be hunted by them. Zhao Hongai didn't want to face such a situation, it would be fatal and humiliating. So, without saying a word, Zhao Hongai called Wang Shen and rushed out with the 12 dull-witted Jin people. Unlike Song Hu's Jin people, who possessed independent personalities and intelligent thinking, the 12 dull-witted Jin people Zhao Hongai had assigned as his guards had expressionless faces without a trace of emotion. They followed closely behind Zhao Hong, charging towards Leslie and his men who were slaughtering people on the battlefield, without a trace of fear. They had only 2 thoughts in their minds: protect their leader and eliminate the enemies. Surrounded by 4 enemies, Song Hu was stabbed in the leg and back. However, with his exceptional fighting skills, Song Hu inflicted heavy losses on his attackers. The man who had stabbed him in the thigh with a rapier had his throat slashed by Song Hu. He now lay on the ground, his eyes bulging and rolling, clutching his throat. The man who had attacked him from behind had his neck severed by Song Hu. His head and body fell to Song Hu's feet. The blood gushing from the unfortunate man's neck covered Song Hu's body, creating a horrifying sight. In a flash, 2 of the 4 attackers fell, the other 2, intimidated by Song Hu's ferocity, engaged in a brief standoff. Song Hu breathed hard, swallowing back the surge of pain and exhaustion. Leslie and his men had completely gained the upper hand. Given a little more time, they could easily defeat them. But how could Zhao Hongai give them such an opportunity? Song Hu's Geno soldiers were already deserting. The pressure of close combat and the bloody intensity had completely broken them. Some knelt on the ground, their heads in their hands, tears welling in their eyes, wailing. Others screamed, dropped their weapons, and ran back toward the camp. Others stood there with blank stares, mumbling incoherently, but their reactions made it clear that this guy was useless. Of course, not all of the Geno soldiers were like this. Some, though terrified, their faces betrayed their fear, yet they gritted their teeth and persevered. If these Geno soldiers survived this battle, they would become veterans. Of the 100 Geno soldiers, after a brief and brutal hand-to-hand fight, fewer than 20 remained fighting, excluding those who had fled, those who had gone into trance, and those who feigned death. Song Hu broke free from the entanglement of 2 opponents, slashing down a sailor with a raised spike, and saving a seriously wounded genetic soldier who was still fighting. The 2 sailors who had confronted Song Hu watched him leave without attempting to stop him. Their impression of Song Hu's ferocity had already left a deep impression on them. Rather than engaging such a formidable opponent, it would be better to eliminate the others. Once they had eliminated those soldiers, they could turn around and take down this massive figure. With that, the 2 sailors exchanged a glance, then, with a groaning cry, rushed off. Song Hu supported the severely wounded genetic soldier with his left hand, carrying him as he stumbled and rescued several more. The situation on the battlefield was not favorable, and Song Hu could not face so many British soldiers alone. In such a chaotic battle, individual prowess was of little use. Song Hu was well aware of this. Therefore, his priority was to immediately gather all the remaining fighting forces, rather than let them fight on their own and be overwhelmed one by one. Everyone, get closer to me. Don't engage the enemy, Song Hu shouted loudly after splitting open several more sailors charging at him. By then, 4 or 5 other soldiers had gathered around him, making their small group a prime target. Take them all in one swoop, Captain Leslie, victory within his grasp, couldn't help but beam with excitement. Unfortunately, in his excitement, Leslie seemed to have forgotten that he still faced a small group of enemies. Song Hu glanced around and spotted Zhao Hongyu, who was running towards them. Zhao Hongyu and his men were flanking Leslie and his men, and Leslie and his men were so engrossed in fighting him that they hadn't noticed Zhao Hongyu and his men. It must be said that Leslie and his men had been a bit careless in this matter. Hold on. The leader is leading his men. If we hold out, we'll eventually defeat these enemies. Seeing Zhao Hongyu, Song Hu felt a little relieved. After hearing Song Hu's words, the genetic people who were still holding on rekindled their fighting spirit. Although they had suffered heavy losses in manpower, Leslie's side was not without casualties. Even if the genetic soldiers' combat effectiveness was poor, they still had 100 people, which was twice as many as Leslie's troops. Therefore, after a short period of close combat, more than a dozen people on Leslie's side fell. Song Hu gathered the remaining dozen genetic warriors, and Leslie also gathered more than 30 sailors who could still fight, preparing to launch a second charge. At this time, Zhao Hongyu, with Wang Shen and 12 dull genetic people, rushed to Leslie's side. Leslie, who originally thought that the combat effectiveness of Zhao Hongyu and his men was the same as that of the people they had just fought, immediately found something wrong. Because the combat effectiveness of the 12 dull genetic people brought by Zhao Hongyu was so terrifying that it was astonishing. Chapter 72 The Problem of Deserters. Zhao Hongyu and his men charged into Leslie's formation, instantly cutting down 7 or 8 of them. The reason was simple, Zhao Hongyu and his men each wielded a hand cannon. Before charging into Leslie's formation, they would approach and fire a single shot. Furthermore, Zhao Hongyu and his men were not ruthless, preferring to shoot at the head rather than the body. Their hand cannons were aimed at the head, resulting in such damage. After firing a hand cannon, they needed to reload, a significant hassle. Therefore, in close combat, they could only fire once at most, leaving no time for a second reload. Having discarded their hand cannons, Zhao Hongyu and his men, brandishing their machetes, engaged in the fray like tigers among a flock of sheep. The addition of Zhao Hongyu and his men to the battlefield suddenly reversed the tide of battle. Song Hu, seizing this opportunity, charged forward with a loud shout. For a moment, Leslie and his men were under attack from both sides. Originally, without Zhao Hongyu and his men, Leslie and his men would have had no trouble dealing with Song Hu and his men. These genetically modified soldiers, possessing independent personalities and intelligent minds, were simply too weak. The problem was, Zhao Hongyu was accompanied by 12 fearless, pain-insensitive monsters, destined to become the protagonists of a tragedy. Watching Zhao Hongyu and his men charge forward, some sailors howled bravely and rushed forward. But to their horror, several tall, muscular men quickly rushed out from Zhao Hongyu's side. They faced the incoming weapons with fearless expressions, neither dodging nor evading, and rushed forward. Puff! Puff! The swords and knives slashed and chopped at their bodies, but their expressions remained unmoved, and there was no sign of pain. After all, they were human beings. Zhao Hongyu and Wang Shen, familiar with these genetically modified humans, knew they were adept at avoiding vital points, striking the enemy with minimal effort and in the shortest possible time. As expected, the wounds sustained by the genies struck by their swords were non-vital. They cleverly avoided the blood vessels in their necks, sustaining only wounds to their chests and abdomens. SHH. Are these guys still human? Why don't they show any sign of pain? Don't they feel pain? The sailors facing Zhao Hongyu and his men felt their hearts pounding, but the next moment, their vision went black, and they lost consciousness. As they were struck, the genies swung their weapons in retaliation, quickly defeating the sailors. The conflict was now a foregone conclusion, and after 5 minutes, Zhao Hongyu's side was victorious. Unfortunately, despite Zhao Hongyu's victory, he couldn't celebrate. The reason was simple, the losses were immense. He had lost 3 of his own genies, and the rest were all injured. Song Hu and his men were also injured, leaving only 9 men. The rest either fled or suffered mental breakdowns, seemingly going insane. Some of the genetically modified humans were lying on the ground, writhing and groaning in pain. Leslie's side had also suffered heavy losses. Of the 56, only 13 remained. Captain Leslie had been dispatched by Wang Shen in the melee. Father Matthew had been lucky, but he was still half dead, and it looked as if he would not survive. Why are these genetically modified humans, possessing independent personalities and intelligent minds, so useless? Zhao Hongyu asked Wang Shan with a gloomy expression after rounding up the British. Wang Shan fell silent for a moment. He hadn't anticipated this situation. Song Hu approached, covered in blood. "Captain, what should we do with those who escaped and those who feigned death?" Song Hu's face was filled with rage, and it was clear he harbored deep resentment for what had happened. He had almost lost his life himself, delayed by these incompetent individuals, so how could he not harbor resentment? During training, everything seemed fine, with no apparent problems. But once on the battlefield, all the flaws were exposed. Fortunately, there were still 12 fearless geneticists. Otherwise, they would likely have lost the battle and their lives. It seems that even with sophisticated weapons, it's not enough. The people wielding them are the most important. After this battle, Song Hu had grown considerably. Hearing this, Zhao Hongyu looked around. "Ouch! Ouch! Help me, my leg is injured. Someone come quickly, my arm was cut." Within the space-time trading machine, the geneticists, bred to simulate real life, were in fact no different from ordinary modern people. Strictly speaking, they were just ordinary high school graduates. Looking at these geneticists, nurtured with such frugality, Zhao Hongyu felt deeply uneasy. Damn, are modern people really so despicable? Song Hu left behind those geneticist soldiers who hadn't collapsed and fought to the end, along with the remaining 9 geneticist guards, to guard the 13 captured British. The 3 of them sat on the ground and began to discuss their plans. For those genetics who escape, find them and kill them. We must be ruthless with deserters, otherwise it will be difficult to manage the rest of the genetics in the future. If it happens once, there will definitely be a second time, and it will have a negative impact on the other genetics. We must be ruthless in eliminating them. Wang Shan made a vicious suggestion. He had no sympathy for those who escaped during battle. Song Hu thought the same thing, but the punishment of these genetics required Zhao Hongyu's approval and order. After all, Zhao Hongyu was their leader. Execute them. A trace of pity flashed across Zhao Hongyu's face. After all, these genetics were his own creation. They were living, breathing people. Besides, Zhao Hongyu had saved and thrifted for 2 months to cultivate them. Yet, the result was a group of genetics who were useless. Zhao Hongyu was heartbroken. Seeing a flicker of pity on Zhao Hongyu's face, Song Hu said, "Chief, sometimes you have to be tough. You don't need to have an ounce of sympathy or pity for those who abandoned their companions and ran away. You have to know that the moment they abandoned us, they actually abandoned themselves." Will they tell my secret? Thinking that after those genetic people escaped, wouldn't it be a big trouble if they told his secret? Song Hu said, "Don't worry about that. The system has set limits in the consciousness of each of us. As long as there is such a thought, the system will erase them. So, no one will do that, huh?" Zhao Hongyu breathed a sigh of relief. As long as his secret was not exposed, he would be fine. He fixed his gaze on Song Hu's face and said, "I have no good feelings towards those guys. Since you two have proposed this, then let's do as you say. Find them, bring them back, and execute them publicly. This should serve as a warning to the rest of us. Otherwise, if someone does this again, how can we survive here?" Thinking of facing more enemies and battles in the future, Zhao Hongyu felt the need to prevent such incidents from happening again. The problem was, these genetic people, possessing independent personalities and intelligent thinking, couldn't control their own thoughts. Most importantly, their behavior was no different from that of ordinary high school students or young adults in the 21st century. This was Zhao Hongyu's biggest headache. The problem with those who escaped has been solved, but what about those who suffered mental breakdowns or feigned their death? Song Hu seemed determined to punish every one of them. He sincerely wished to strangle those who escaped or died in the collision. He held no hatred for those who had suffered mental breakdowns due to the bloodshed and pressure. He could only blame them for their weak mental resilience. Now they had become idiots, so why should Song Hu hate them? When Song Hu asked what to do with these 2 types of genetically modified humans, Zhao Hongyu fell silent. These people should be executed as well. Their behavior is just as egregious as the escaped genetically modified humans, Wang Shan suggested, noticing Zhao Hongyu's silence. Unfortunately, Wang Shan's opinion didn't count. Song Hu still had to defer to Zhao Hongyu. Not far away, the British prisoners, crouching on the grass, looked dejected. They stared at Zhao Hongyu and the other two with some fear, watching their incessant conversation, wondering if they were discussing their fate. Don't move. If you move again, you'll be in trouble. A genetically modified soldier, still bleeding from a wound in the arm, stabbed the man who was thrashing about nervously with his rapier, then uttered a warning in broken English with a stern expression. The genetically modified soldier's expression was more than just stern, it was twisted almost like a demon. The man being warned was almost certain that if he made even the slightest mistake, he would have another hole in his body within the next quarter of an hour. For a moment, the British prisoners quieted down. Not far away, the intermittent groans of several severely wounded British sailors, still alive but still wounded, filled the captives with even greater anxiety. They didn't know what their fate would be, nor did they know what would become of their injured comrades. Lord, bless you, sadly, such prayers were useless. Here, the so-called Lord's glory they spoke of simply couldn't reach them. And even if it did, it would be of no use to Zhao Hongyu. Go ask your men what they've decided on for punishing those men. Zhao Hongyu agreed with executing deserters, but he couldn't come up with a plan for dealing with those who feigned death on the battlefield. After all, while these men might be playing tricks, they hadn't done anything as awful as running away. Song Hu nodded, stood up, and walked towards the captives. The commander's ear, be careful. Seeing Song Hu approaching, the genetic soldiers who had been fighting him so persistently straightened their backs and shouted at the captives even louder. Sir, snap. After Song Hu came over, the genetic soldiers straightened up and saluted. Put your hands down, everyone has worked hard. Song Hu looked at the genetic soldiers with a smile. He was quite satisfied that the genetic soldiers had been following him and fighting the enemy. Song Hu's eyes also swept across the group of British prisoners. His cold eyes made the 13 prisoners shiver uncontrollably. I came here to ask for everyone's opinions on how to deal with those who pretended to be dead in battle. After retracting his gaze, Song Hu raised this question. Chapter 73, What a Savage. The leader asked me to ask you about the punishment for deserters and those who feign death on the battlefield. I must hear your opinions on this matter, Song Hu asked directly without further ado. When Song Hu mentioned these people, the faces of the genetic soldiers who had fought alongside him from beginning to end, sharing the bloodshed, were filled with indignation. It was clear that they were furious at the presence of such scum among their comrades. Sir, the punishment for deserters has always been harsh, no matter what era. Deserting during battle is especially egregious. One of the genetic soldiers, now pale and stabbed 3 times but still following Song Hu and fighting Leslie and the others, said angrily. Song Hu nodded. So what do you mean? The genetic soldiers spoke one after another. Execute them. Yes, execute them. Such scum must not be allowed to remain. They are a disgrace. Sir, this kind of behavior cannot be allowed to flourish. If they were let off this time, who could guarantee there wouldn't be a next time? The geneticists who had fought to the bitter end all expressed their current stance, to find the deserters and execute them. Only such punishment could dispel their resentment. What about those guys who feigned death? Song Hu tilted his head and gestured. What else can we do? Their behavior is also extremely egregious. While not as bad as the deserters, they deserve death, too. The geneticist soldiers seemed to be eager for the death of their scumbag comrades. In fact, Song Hu understood them perfectly, for in his heart, he wished they were all dead. Keeping them alive was a waste of food, and their lives were useless. If they didn't die, what else could they do? But the problem was, these people had been bred at great expense. He had to consider Zhao Hongyu's opinions and couldn't make his own decisions. The fact that Zhao Hongyu was willing to listen to everyone's opinions suggested a deep conflict within him. However, when everyone agreed, Zhao Hongyu had no choice but to make the painful decision. After listening to his soldiers' opinions, Song Hu said, "All right, I understand your intentions now. So, I'll convey this to the leader and let him know. Keep an eye on these Brits. Don't be polite to them, there are prisoners now." Song Hu finished with a sinister laugh. The implication of Song Hu's words was self-evident, and the genetarian certainly understood his meaning. Why should we be polite to prisoners? There's no Geneva Convention in this era. And they're not from continental Europe, they don't have to abide by their rules. With that, Song Hu returned to Zhao Hongyu. Leader, I've asked everyone. Everyone agrees that those deserters and those feigning death should all be executed. Zhao Hongyu was resigned to this conclusion. Well, since this is everyone's wish, I can't argue with it. Besides, those guys brought this upon themselves. were not to blame. Zhao Hongayu's expression gradually hardened. Since the situation couldn't be changed, he had to make a decision. Although he felt a little pained by the training costs, Zhao Hongyu also knew that if he didn't handle this matter properly, it would surely set a bad precedent. It would be disastrous if all the geneticists followed suit. After all, these geneticists all possessed independent personalities and intelligent thinking patterns. Send someone back to the camp and mobilize all the soldiers. We need to divide up the task of capturing deserters. We also have to deal with those bastards whining about minor injuries. We're short-handed right now. Zhao Hongyu calmed himself and issued an order. He then glanced at the captured British and said, and these prisoners need to be kept under guard, too. The fighting power of the 13 British prisoners was not to be underestimated. After this battle, Zhao Hongyu truly didn't dare underestimate the Europeans of this era. Okay, Chief. Song Hu immediately called a geneticist over and told him to return to the camp and gather everyone, weapons drawn. After the geneticist who had reported the incident left, Zhao Hongyu, Wang Shan, and Song Hu approached the prisoners. Sir, Chief, Zhao Hongyu nodded in response. Keep an eye on these guys. I've sent people back to camp to gather more troops. There are more British to the south. We've suffered heavy losses in this battle, so we need more forces and reinforcements. Zhao Hongyu explained his plans to everyone. None of the gene creatures objected to his plan. Those who had persevered to the end had made a significant leap forward in both their spirit and their understanding of themselves as soldiers. At the very least, judging by their appearance, they now truly considered themselves soldiers. Seeing many of the gene creatures' wounds still bleeding, Zhao Hongyu personally bandaged them. Although it was simply a simple bandage, it moved the gene creatures deeply. Zhao Hongyu felt a pang of pain, as he saw some soldiers with wounds so deep they could even see the bone. Alice, he had no medical gauze, only penicillin and saline. He was extremely short on medicine. It seemed that this time he would have to simultaneously cultivate gene creatures and invest in a counterfeit research institute. This time, the gene man decided to abandon the intelligent ones and rely solely on the dull ones. After this lesson, Zhao Hongyu no longer valued the gene man with independent personalities and intelligent thinking. And Zhao Hongyu had learned a lesson. After bandaging the gene man's wounds, Zhao Hongyu sat down to the side. He also suggested that Wang Shan and the remaining 9 lifeguards gene man take care of those lying on the ground, feigning death and groaning in pain. Of course, this also included the severely wounded British who were suffering, but not yet dead. Wang Shan and his team would show mercy and end their suffering. The 13 captured British sailors watched in horror as Wang Shan and his 9 impassive gene man as they approached the injured and struck them in the chest with a clean, sharp blow. The next moment, the groans fell silent. What horrified the British prisoners even more was that Wang Shan and his men not only killed the wounded British, but also their own people. What kind of brutality, what kind of madness, would it take to kill even their own people? Even the British wouldn't do such a thing. An inexplicable fear enveloped the prisoners, lingering and oppressive. The severely wounded British had no power to resist, and could only watch Wang Shan and his men end their suffering and their lives. Meanwhile, some of the genetic people, who hadn't suffered much damage themselves but were lying on the ground groaning and playing tricks, grew terrified. No, what are you doing? We're one of us, ugh. Ah. Puff. No, help. Puff. You can't do this. We must respect human rights. You trample on them. Puff. Zhao Hongyu's mouth twitched at this. Damn it. They even know about human rights. It seems these are truly the new generation of youth nurtured by the art of simulating reality. But if you're going to be clever, you'll have to accept the consequences. Zhao Hongyu no longer felt pity for these people. They had brought this upon themselves. They were so afraid of death on the battlefield that they put their comrades in danger. Why didn't they talk about human rights back then? These bastards deserved death. These genetic people only made excuses when facing Wang Shan, not understanding their own mistakes. If even one of them understood this, Zhao Hongyu might have felt a little better. Sadly, these people only made excuses. No one got the point. Disappointment, utter disappointment. Zhao Hongyu was completely disappointed in these people. A deep sadness welled up in him, and he didn't know whether he felt sadness for himself or for the children educated in the 21st century. It was this kind of simulated education that bred such young people. Fortunately, not everyone was like this. There were a few who fought Wang Shan to the end, becoming the bright spots among them. It was precisely because of these people that Zhao Hongyu didn't completely despair. Wang Shen and his men were swift and decisive. Heedless of the men's pleas for mercy, they struck with decisive blows, each one aiming for a fatal blow. Over 20 of the genie soldiers, who had been playing dead, were quickly executed. The severely wounded British soldiers were also dealt with by Wang Shen and his men. With these men dealt with, the area finally fell silent, free from the annoying groans and groans. These men were ruthless. They were not only ruthless to their enemies, but even more so to their own people. The 13 British captives looked at the genie soldiers with a perverse look. In the past, the British had despised the genie soldiers for their feeble combat capabilities. Even as captives, they hadn't truly accepted their position. They believed that if Zhao Hongyu hadn't led the royal guards to attack them from both sides, victory would have been theirs. But now, they no longer dared to believe that. One could only imagine the depth of madness of those who could treat their own people this way. Coupled with the inhumane state displayed by the guards' gene people in battle, these British guys were completely convinced. What barbarians! These British guys had the same thought in their hearts. Chapter 74 Lucky Chelsea. About 40 minutes later, the male warriors remaining at the camp became anxious and rushed to Zhao Hongyu's side. 50 Indian warriors who had joined Zhao Hongyu and become his tribesmen also sent 30 to follow the gene bearers. Even the female gene bearers were not left behind. Ugh! When the gene bearers arrived at the battlefield, the young men were horrified by the bloody scene. Many of them bent over and vomited after seeing the corpses or the white brains oozing from the severed heads. The female gene bearers were especially irritated. Watching the gene bearers' reactions, Zhao Hongyu shook his head inwardly. Disappointment was all he felt. However, the Indians who had come with them were less responsive. They had witnessed too much death, so they were quite indifferent to the scene. The sight of the English corpses on the ground made the Indians' eyes light up. They looked at Zhao Hongyu with rapt attention, as if he had accomplished something great. Zhao Hongyu understood these Indians perfectly and knew why they reacted this way. Black Bear had made it clear when he sent them to him. These Indians had a deep hatred for the white people. Their tribes had been destroyed by them. It was true that the British were their enemies. The British in Virginia had indeed committed many such atrocities. The main reason these Indians joined Zhao Hongyu and became his tribesmen was because Black Bear had told them that Zhao Hongyu would dare to kill white people, and that by following him, they could avenge their grievances. These Indians had joined the Mohican tribe, hoping they would help them seek revenge. However, after living there for over a year, they realized this was unrealistic. Furthermore, the Mohican elders were reluctant to provoke conflict with the white people, making their revenge impossible. But if they didn't join the Mohicans, who else could they turn to? These people originally belonged to the Anauchi, a small tribe south of the Mohicans. This tribe had always revered the Mohicans, championing them and participating in oppression and war against other tribes. It could be said that the Anauchi were the Mohicans' golden warriors and their trusted wolves. While this earned them protection, it also irritated the surrounding tribes. It was for this reason that the British, while secretly weakening the Mohicans, initially targeted this loyal lackey. The British proposal was echoed by some tribes that had defected to the British and held grudges against the Mohicans. This put the Anauchi in dire straits. As protectors, the Mohicans should have avenged their foes in such a situation. However, Atito's father, Samra, abandoned this idea after being invited to a military parade at the British camp. Samra believed that fighting the whites, armed with fire-breathing weapons, would lead to the destruction of the Mohawk tribe. While the Anauchi were indeed loyal allies, they were now annihilated. Waging war for a tribe already extinct was not worth the effort. Furthermore, after the British demonstrated their strength, they also wooed the Indian tribes that had joined them, placing immense psychological pressure on Samra. Clearly, the British were warning Samra. Don't underestimate the Mohawk tribe's strength. We have many tribes allied with us, and even with so many of us, you can't defeat them. All these factors combined made the Anauchi survivors' hopes for revenge completely impossible. It was precisely because of this that the remaining Anauchi, residing within the Mohawk tribe, joined Zhao Hongyu at Black Bear's persuasion. A crucial factor was the better food at Zhao Hongyu's place. After all, becoming Zhao Hongyu's tribe meant they could buy rice at half the price of the Mohicans. Now that they were seeking revenge, Zhao Hongyu's abundant supplies made him a wise choice. Furthermore, the Anauchi were deeply hurt by the Mohicans' failure to help their loyal Anunchi. During their time as Zhao Hongyu's tribe, the Anachi experienced many new things. For example, Zhao Hongyu and his tribe treated them with great courtesy and hospitality. If anyone had a problem, they simply spoke to their leader, Zhao Hongyu, and he would resolve it. Everything was different from the Mohicans. Experiencing the Zhao tribe's friendliness, the Anachi gradually integrated themselves into the tribe. It seemed that this leader was indeed as Black Bear had predicted. He was truly daring enough to attack the white people. The Anachi, no longer harboring any urge for revenge, felt their cold hearts warmed upon seeing the bodies of the Englishmen lying in the grass. An Anachi walked over to a corpse and squatted, carefully examining the wound. This fellow's fatal wound is in the chest. It looks like he was stabbed to death after being severely injured and unable to fight. The Anachi warriors were naturally skilled in combat, so they immediately noticed the clues in how many of the British had died. You don't need to look. There's no point in keeping the seriously injured. If we don't kill them, how can we keep them alive? Zhao Hongyu's voice came over at the right time. Chief, the Anachi nodded to Zhao Hongyu. Zhao Hongyu waved his hand and said, we may have another fight later. I heard there are still many white people on the beach to the south. Are you afraid? After hearing Zhao Hongyu's words, the Anachi laughed. A short but sturdy young man shouted back, we Anachi have never known fear, let alone killing those white men. We simply feel the rising temperature in our blood, a sign that we can't wait to fight. Zhao Hongyu nodded. Clean up the battlefield and pick up our muskets. It would be a shame to leave them here. Once we're ready, we'll head to the South Beach. Zhao Hongyu couldn't wait. He had to wipe out the British who had landed on Manhattan Island immediately. If they gained a foothold, it would be a huge problem for him. Chief, what about those British prisoners? Should we take them with us? Song Hu approached and leaned over to ask. Kill them? Zhao Hongyu thought about it and felt that it was a waste of time. After all, these British were good laborers, and the Mayflower needed someone to teach them how to operate it. Zhao Hongyu wasn't a fool to think they could easily operate a 1620s sailing ship. The sheer number of cables alone was dizzying. It was definitely not something Zhao Hongyu could just let his men manipulate with a whim. Captain, we still have to go south. If these people cause trouble at a critical moment, we'll suffer greatly. So I suggest we kill them. There are more British on the southern beaches anyway. Song Hu's words completely changed Zhao Hongyu's thinking. True, it wouldn't be a pity if these people died. There were still more on the southern beaches. And Song Hu was right. If these people suddenly turned on them, they could cause them considerable trouble. Therefore, to be on the safe side, killing these prisoners was the safest option. Zhao Hongyu didn't have chains or shackles. If he had them, perhaps the British prisoners wouldn't have died. But the problem was, Zhao Hongyu didn't have them. Choose the crew member who knows the most and keep him. The rest, remember to let the Anunnaki do this. I think they'll be very happy. Also, remember to observe the reactions of the geneticists who come later. Anyone who doesn't meet the requirements will be kicked out of the guard. Idiots won't be allowed to join. Zhao Hongyu raised his right hand, gestured at his neck, and then gave Song Hu some key instructions. Song Hu nodded seriously and turned to leave. A moment later, cheers erupted from the Anunnaki. It was clear that after Song Hu conveyed his orders, the Anunnaki were indeed excited, just as Zhao Hongyu had predicted. The Anunnaki brothers rubbed their hands, grinning mischievously and glancing at the captives from time to time. This made the captives feel uneasy. If it weren't for the constant scolding from the surrounding genetic warriors and the threat of the glaring weapons, they would probably have gone berserk on the spot. A deep sense of oppression and unease washed over the captives. Song Hu walked over with a serious face, and 30 Anachi followed closely behind him. Song Hu asked in not very fluent English, report your respective positions and your understanding of the ship. Since the leader said that only one person can be left, then he must choose someone who knows more to stay. As for the rest of the people, who would care about their life or death? The 13 captives didn't know what they were going to do, but they still honestly reported their respective positions and what they were proficient in. Finally, a handyman named Chelsea was selected, although his position was not very high. But on the Mayflower, he had done everything, and basically he knew something. If such a person did not stay, who else could stay? Song Hu made a prompt decision and asked this boy who was only 18 years old, who had been a beggar and had worked as a handyman on the ship at the age of 12, to come out. At this time, the boy named Chelsea did not know how lucky he was. Compared with him, his companions were relatively. Chapter 75, Chief, You have to respect human rights. What are you doing? Ugh. Wow. Get away, you bastards. Ugh. Amidst the cries of curses, Wang Shen and his guardsmen, expressionless, slaughtered the 12 British captives. Chelsea, the lucky one chosen to stay, sat limp on the ground, her hands bound behind her back with tattered rags, watching in horror as her companions were slaughtered like chickens and ducks. The sailors of the Mayflower had done this kind of thing before. They'd killed disobedient slaves in Africa, or strung them into chains and thrown into the sea when food ran low. Back then, they didn't treat them as human beings. Now, it was their turn. You should feel lucky to be alive, Zhao Hongyu said, standing over Chelsea and kicking him twice. But then, Zhao Hongyu frowned. A foul, fishy smell filled his nostrils. Zhao Hongyu looked down and saw, damn. Chelsea had actually pooped his pants. What bad luck. Zhao Hongyu walked away a few steps, finally free from the inquiries. Wang Shen and his men quickly dispatched the British captives. Afterward, Wang Shen returned to Zhao Hongyu and said, Captain, we've taken care of them all. Zhao Hongyu nodded. Gather the armor and wear it yourselves. It's valuable stuff, don't waste it. Zhao Hongyu couldn't buy much right now, least of all armor. Wang Shen turned and shouted, and the genetic guards began removing armor from the corpses and donning it themselves. Captain, they're captives, powerless to resist. Why are you killing them? This is a complete disregard for human rights. We are human beings, not beasts. Just as Zhao Hongyu was about to issue the order to continue advancing south, a genetic girl emerged and shouted indignantly at him. Ugh! Zhao Hongyu and Wang Shen were both stunned, then they looked at the genetic girl. The genetic girl's face was pale, clearly showing she was quite unwell with what had just happened. Zhao Hongyu had some impression of her, it seemed she was the one who vomited the most violently. Like the girl, many female and some male genetic people turned their gazes on him and Wang Shen, awaiting their response. Although they remained silent, their expressions showed their deep agreement with the girl's words. Zhao Hongyu narrowed his eyes. He truly didn't want to answer the question, it wasn't something he needed to answer, nor was there any need to. Such a jerk. Others can kill as they please after traveling through time, yet here I have to explain myself to my men. And those other travelers' careers were all smooth sailing, why was it so difficult for me? Thinking of the protagonists in the novels he'd read, Zhao Hongyu felt like a complete failure. It seemed that without the inherent aura of dominance, one couldn't succeed. Looking down, Zhao Hongyu thought to himself with a self-deprecating chuckle, then shook his head. Then, Zhao Hongyu turned away, completely ignoring the genetic girl. He had gone to great lengths to defeat Leslie and the other Brits. As the victor, he had the right to deal with the captives. Even more so than executing them. After all, Zhao Hongyu was the victor, wasn't he? On the other hand, what would have happened if Leslie and the others had won? If Leslie and the others had won, not only Zhao Hongyu and the others, but even the people in the camp would have suffered a bad fate. He didn't know what they were thinking. In this day and age, human rights were still important. Even if you want to talk about human rights, it depends on the target. It's utterly unreasonable to talk about human rights with the enemy. Seeing Zhao Hongyu turn around, Wang Shen knew his leader was a little angry. He just didn't show it, so he had to step up and explain himself. He was also furious. What business did the lives of others have on them? In this day and age, even talking about human rights was ridiculous. So, Wang Shen walked over and looked at the genetically modified girl with a stern face. As if frightened by Wang Shen's expression, the young geneticist took a few steps back. However, she felt embarrassed by her cowardice, so she mustered her courage, stopped, and raised her eyes to meet Wang Shen's aggressive gaze. Human rights. Little girl, you're actually talking to us about human rights. Wang Shen slowly approached the girl, his expression a half-smile. Talking about human rights in this day and age? Don't you think you're crazy? Zhao Hongyu had no interest in Wang Shen's lecture on the geneticists. He needed to obtain useful intelligence from Chelsea. In the one battle, he had lost over 80 men, a significant loss. He had painstakingly cultivated only 200 geneticists in 2 months. It could be said that this time, he had lost half of them. It would be a lie to say he wasn't heartbroken by such a loss. However, Zhao Hongyu had come to terms with it. Without this battle, Zhao Hongyu wouldn't have seen the weaknesses of these geneticists and the potential dangers within his own group. Boy, how many of you are left? If you don't want to become fertilizer for this land like your companions, Then I hope you'll answer my questions honestly. Chelsea didn't need Zhao Hongayu's threats. He answered all his questions honestly. It seemed that the death of his companions had indeed frightened Chelsea. Across the beach, there were still Puritans who had come with a ship in search of land, over 200 men, women, and children. They were civilians, and while they had weapons, their fighting power was not very high. Leslie had not brought all the Mayflower sailors with him, a dozen or so remained with the Puritans. Chelsea also explained in detail that Captain Leslie and the sailors who had been killed had come to burn, kill, and loot. The genetic girls and some of the male genetics present fell silent after hearing Chelsea's words. However, Chelsea's subsequent words made the young men and women who had clamored for human rights for the prisoners look embarrassed. That's what we do in Africa. In those small, defenseless tribes, the men are killed, and the women, of course, become playthings. We then plunder any valuable property. Those who are still alive, we load onto ships and sell them as slaves. As Chelsea spoke, the expressions of the genetic people, who had previously believed in indiscriminate killing, became unnatural. Zhao Hongyu sighed inwardly. It seemed these genetic people could only manage like ordinary people. They could farm and teach, but they were truly unsuitable as soldiers. Zhao Hongyu made a decision: these genetic people, with their independent personalities and intelligent minds, should be used elsewhere. If we were defeated by you, what do you think would be our fate? Zhao Hongyu asked. Chelsea didn't know how to respond to Zhao Hongyu's question. Seeing Chelsea's concern, Zhao Hongyu said, "Don't worry, I won't do anything to you. If I wanted to kill you, I wouldn't have left you alone. Kill those who resist. We'll sell the men as slaves, and we'll play with the women. If they survive, we'll wear them down and sell them along with the men," Chelsea answered honestly. The young woman who had first stood up and urged Zhao Hongyu to talk about human rights turned pale, as if she'd eaten 50 flies. Ignoring the reactions of the geneticists, Zhao Hongyu said to Wang Shan, "Tell these soldiers not to follow us. We'll have the Anich soldiers with us." As he spoke to Wang Shan, he pointed at the geneticists who had stood up and demanded that he respect human rights for the captives. "Bury these bodies, and take back to camp any weapons we can't take. These geneticists, like the previous ones, might become a drag if a fight broke out." So Zhao Hongyu didn't want these people, who constantly talked about human rights but vomited at the sight of blood, to continue following him. The weapons left behind by the fallen genocide had to be retrieved, otherwise it would be a shame. The bodies also needed to be buried, so these people were responsible for that. Wang Shan didn't bother with these genocide anymore. He thought their brains were nothing but crap. Zhao Hongyu still had 9 guard genocide, 12 surviving genocide with intelligence, and 30 Anichi warriors under his command. If they launched a surprise attack on the British on the southern beach, they still had a good chance of success. They still didn't know that Leslie and his men had been annihilated. Therefore, a surprise attack was still a possibility. "Let's go. The sooner we take care of those British, the sooner we can rest assured." Zhao Hongyu didn't want to stay here any longer. The genocide was a bit annoying. As the saying goes, there are all kinds of people in the world. Can you still hold on? Song, whose men were all wounded and should have stayed. However, considering there were over 300 British troops on the southern beach, Zhao Hongyu had no choice but to take them with him. "No problem, just a few minor injuries," the genetics nodded in response. As they looked at their fellow genetics left behind, their eyes revealed deep disdain. "HMPH. What cowards. Why didn't you go and tell the enemy to give us human rights while we were fighting?" One genetic snorted, causing the female genetics to bow their heads. "Alright, let's go." Zhao Hongyu waved and headed south. Seeing Zhao Hongyu gone, Wang Shan, Song Hu, the other genetics, and the Anich warriors followed him. Leaving behind were a group of genetics, both men and women, who hadn't yet adapted to this era, watching the departure with complicated eyes. Unbeknownst to these genetics, their fate had already changed dramatically from that moment on. Because of their actions, Zhao Hongyu had already given up on them. Instead of using these intelligent genetic people, Zhao Hongyu now prefers to use those genetic people who are fearless, obedient to orders, but a little dull. If for no other reason, just obeying orders is enough. "Chief, if you ask me, these people are just too young and haven't experienced too many storms. So they always look at problems superficially. Just give them some time to see through the problem." As the team was moving quickly, Wang Shan saw that his leader was unhappy. Knowing that he was angry about the genetic people, He whispered to comfort him. Zhao Hongai also understood this truth. Wang Shan, I understand what you said. They are just too young and don't understand many things. Time can make them grow, but the problem is that I don't have so much time to wait for these immature guys to grow up. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.